The Innkeeper by Life Sketcher. Chapter 641 Departure. After delivering his speech, Lex left the podium and let the banquet progress normally. He no longer felt like the mood of the banquet needed to be fun or jovial. Considering that the 1,000 workers would be heading off to the battlefield, he felt that the rest of the time should be spent with the focus on them. After all, no matter how much Lex helped them prepare, there was a very real possibility that they might not make it back. Still, the mood the rest of the time was very relaxed. If the workers felt nervous or anxious, they did not show it. Instead, they kept gushing over how much they liked their new suits. If one overheard their conversations, one would assume they would be heading to a field trip rather than to war. Soon, a live orchestra standing on a cloud nearby began to play live music, and the banquet transitioned to the dance. This was quite entertaining to watch actually, since most people didn't really know any real dances, but as cultivators of various levels, they were quite adept in movement techniques. As a result, the workers were making up dances on the go, which resulted in quite an interesting show. The most interesting was the dance between Little Blue and the Soul Bird. They were flying around, swinging like crazy in the air. Wherever Little Blue flew, drops of water fell like rain, since it was still learning to control its ability, and whenever the bird passed by, the drops evaporated instantly. Since the inn protected everyone from the bird's heat, to the viewers it all seemed just like an interesting smoke show. Moreover, due to the constant rain and light, rainbows were formed wherever the two went. With no one truly leading and showing them how it was done, the workers truly did end up doing whatever they wanted. Some bunnies began mounting peacocks and strut around one another, as if challenging each other to a dance duel. The massive, evolved magic carpet had the turtle ride on its head and shook around, as if it was trying to dance as well. The humans were not to be left behind either. They grabbed hands and spun each other round and around till one of them had their feet lifted into the air and began flying, until the other one suddenly let go, sending them flying towards a specific target. The humans began playing darts using other humans. Left didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he watched what they did, but decided not to interfere. There was no designated way to enjoy oneself, and if they were enjoying themselves by behaving like idiots, well, one had to remember that most of them were just 1 year old. He teleported away, no longer overseeing the workers. The thing he had to do next was prepare to send his workers to the battlefield. It was really easy, since he had been provided a teleportation formation. He only needed to set it up. He had never sent one of his workers outside the inn before, although theoretically it shouldn't be an issue. In essence, in the way that he could choose to teleport to any place connected to the inn, he could send his workers too. After all, if there was no mechanism to send out his employees, then he wouldn't have received a quest to recruit Marlowe as a porter oh so long ago. Deploying the formation was disappointingly easy. The lead-up to the workers' departure felt agonizingly slow to Lex, but eventually the banquet ended, and the next day came. But all the workers did not return to their posts just yet, and instead stood in silence as they watched the 1,000 gathered workers. It was time for them to go, but no one had any words left to say. They could only watch and pray. When the innkeeper appeared, he summoned Luther to have a private word with him first. "I don't expect it to be a problem, but make sure that you all stay together. You all have to make sure to protect one another. While there will be others there with you, and they will be your allies, that is only theoretical. The only ones you can trust are each other. Everyone has a couple of keys with them, in case they ever need it, but I want you to take this as well." Lex held out one of his Innkeeper business cards, drenched in the aura of the Innkeeper. "If you run into any problems, or if they try to split you all up, don't hesitate to call me through the card. Though the Midnight Inn is sending a force to contribute in an inane war, that does not mean we can be pushed around." Luther took the card and tucked it safely in the inner pocket of his coat. Although the Innkeeper told him not to hesitate in summoning him, Luther decided not to summon the Innkeeper unless it was the last resort. As for the rest, treat this as a learning experience. The comrades you make during war are special, and cannot be discovered in simple times. Go, expand your contacts, as well as your horizons. Luther nodded in confirmation, but did not say anything. The innkeeper was clearly trusting him to lead the others, which was a monumental task. Perhaps one would expect such a task to go to Gerard, based on his position as the head of security, but Lex felt he did not have the right temperament. Perhaps as long as he was within the inn, it didn't matter so much, but on a battlefield, only someone as ruthless as Luther would suffice. I think you should take a look at. With everything said, Luther returned to the others, and they were teleported away. There was no fanfare of fancy speeches. Lex did not feel like there was a need to drag the matter on endlessly. Sometimes, it was better to just get on with it quickly. With the workers sent out of the inn, Lex prepared to return to the Crystal Realm and complete his quest, but he was interrupted by the sound of a familiar notification. System notification, hidden quest completed. The teleportation away from the inn was seamless, despite it being powered by a formation provided by someone else. That was because with the inn's upgraded teleportation abilities, Lex had more or less hijacked the teleportation point. Of course, just because there was an easy way to reach the destination did not mean that it was linked to the inn. Not yet anyway, but that didn't matter. Svel.com when the 1,000 workers of the inn teleported over, they were instantly overwhelmed. Since this was the first time any of them left the inn, they were not prepared for the polluted and impure air of the universe. The smell of synthetic cleaners filled the massive hall they teleported in, almost making them gag, but they controlled themselves. They knew war wasn't going to be easy. It only made sense that it shouldn't smell great either. The group had teleported inside a dedicated teleportation area, which was one of many in the entire hall. There were easily tens of thousands more troops appearing every minute, and they all wore different kinds of armors and gear. There was a host of personnel standing ready, guiding and registering each and every new group. One such person approached the group from the inn, dressed in a brown jumpsuit and a helmet sporting a silver visor, hiding the person's face. Welcome to Battlefront 00974. Is there a designated leader among your group? Luther stepped forward, standing face to face with the man. Much like the group, the man was in the Foundation realm, so when Luther stepped near, his surging aura momentarily stunned him. Affiliated group and number of soldiers, please, the man stuttered, unable to calm himself down in time. Midnight Inn, 1,000 soldiers, Luther said succinctly. Although the innkeeper had told him to make comrades, he did not think he was referring to a weak floor worker like this. Midnight Inn. 1,000 soldiers, alright, I've registered your arrival. Someone will lead you to have your identities logged, and then your assignments will be given to you. Wherever we go, we will go together. We will not be separated, informed Luther. Even if he didn't already have such thoughts, the innkeeper repeatedly emphasized that they should stay together, so he would never compromise on this. You specialize in group combat? Well, that shouldn't be an issue. Continue on with registration, and be sure to mention that you've trained for group combat. No one will want to diminish your combat effectiveness, so you'll all be stationed together. Luther nodded, as if that was barely an acceptable answer, and then began leading his group forward. He was pleased that no one had tried to split them up, and he took note of the group combat that the previous man had mentioned. Hopefully, there won't be any problems later either. It would suck if he had to beat someone up so soon. Chapter 642, Let Z take the lead. System notification, hidden quest complete. Hidden quest, the Midnight Inn is a bastion and a safe haven for all guests from across the universe. Yet such a refuge is bound to attract hostile attention. Sometimes, dealing with miscreants when they arrive at the inn is already too late. Take proactive measures to eliminate forces hostile to the inn before they arrive at the inn. Quest reward, Midnight Battalion panel unlocked. Remarks, even a broken clock is right twice a day, but it took you over a year to do something right once. Lex was stunned. Midnight Battalion? Alright, he could openly and clearly admit that the Midnight Inn was a little different from what one would expect from an inn, maybe. But what kind of inn had its own battalion? Although, he could somewhat understand the system's motives. While he was sure that a lot of the beings that visit the inn could be convinced to holster their hostile nature if they had one, there were bound to be many that just would not do so. If that were the case, it made sense to go out and face them directly. But, that way, wouldn't he end up fighting beings across the universe? No, that surely wasn't what this was for. It was most likely that the purpose of the battalion was to go out and face specific targets who were enemies of the inn. Yes, that made sense. In fact, why should he limit himself just to a battalion? Didn't he have a secret news agency? Couldn't he spread spies across the universe to gather secret intel? Or be on the lookout for more inheritances, which he could add to his inheritance haul? Once Lex started thinking like this, he realized that the possibilities were endless. Why did he have to personally go to the Emporium every time he needed a trade? Couldn't he set up a trading outfit or organization which got the inn supplies which the system didn't naturally provide it with? Lex reined in his excitement and first took a look at the Midnight Battalion panel. If it was anywhere near as multifunctional and overarching as the event panel, Lex could not even begin to imagine the power. Yet, much to Lex's chagrin, almost all the functions in the panel were grayed out and couldn't even be seen, let alone used. "Mary, why is this new panel inoperable?" Lex asked, slightly annoyed. Since the battalion is supposed to operate outside the inn, it is difficult for the system to perform optimally considering its damaged state. "I cannot say for certain, but I expect you will need to repair 20 or 25% functionality before the panel starts showing more features." Lex controlled his disappointment and looked at the one single feature for the battalion which was available. It was called Battle Formations. After opening it, Lex began to peruse it and found that it was actually quite useful. For the first time since he received the butter knife, the system finally gave him a method of attacking someone directly. It was quite convenient because much like the formations he could buy for the inn, he could buy battle formations for his battalion, and the system would automatically send the information to his battalion. Unfortunately, it could not make them proficient from the get-go, and it would require training. But at least this way he had a way of directly purchasing things from the system rather than looking around in place like the Emporium. As he was perusing the list of formations, his eyes suddenly locked onto a specific one. He read the name and then the description of the formation, then read it several more times just to be sure he wasn't making a mistake. Considering it was a formation for Foundation Realm cultivators, it was quite expensive at 120 million MP. When it was factored in that the suits Lex got each and every one of them for 100 million, that sounded like it was quite cheap, but that was only because Lex went unnecessarily overboard in having the suit made. A budget of 100 million for a suit was more appropriate for Earth immortals, but Lex did not care about such minor details when it came to the life of his oldest and most trusted workers. Still, this formation. Lex bought it immediately. Another result of the battalion panel was that, once Lex registered the battalion, he would be able to directly speak to the commander of the battalion even when he was outside the inn. Otherwise, once workers of the inn left, he would be unable to contact them. Fortunately, this was a feature of the panel, and not a service, so Lex could employ it even now. As soon as he bought the formation, he knew the information would be transmitted to them directly. But he needed to pass some instructions to ensure maximum effectiveness. If you end up needing to use the battle formation I sent you, do not control it yourself. Have Z take control of the formation. Luther would get the message, though Luther himself would have no way of answering. If he wanted to do that, he would have to activate the business card the innkeeper gave him, but it would be a waste to use it just for this. Since he would get the message, Lex turned his attention back to other things. He had inspected his body quite thoroughly, using his own senses as well as checking his status through the system, but there was no mention or indication of any inscriptions on his body. But Lex did not doubt at all that they were there. He just needed to discover a way to locate, and then remove them. However, since he could not do that right now, there was only one thing left for him to do at the inn. He put on his Leo persona, and teleported away. When he reappeared, he was in front of the Midnight Tailor. He had been extremely impressed by the suits that had been made for everyone, and wanted one of his own. Not bothering to knock, He walked in to find Jeeves sprawled on a reclining sofa, snoring lightly. Drool was dripping down his cheek and a small puddle had formed on the ground near him. Lex could not really blame him for his state, the man had worked himself to the bone the past few days. Still, every employee had a bedroom they could visit any time. Was there really a need to sleep here, like this? Lex cleared his throat, hoping it would rouse the man, to no avail. He tried again, a little louder, but there was still no result. In the end, he nudged Jeeves' foot with his own, startling the sleeping man. He jumped up as if he was being ambushed, and held out clenched fists as if he was ready to fight, but he still had no idea what was happening. He looked left and right, trying to discern his location and what was happening. The poor fellow was completely disoriented, and it took him a couple of minutes to realize that he was, in fact, not being assaulted. Oh dear, excuse my rather poor display, the man said to Leo, as he wiped the drool off his cheek. I must have dozed off while packing up. It's not a problem. I understand you've had a busy few days. That's one way of putting it. Jeeves muttered under his breath as he slowly made his way behind the counter, and then looked at Leo. Truthfully, he had no intention of working until he got a full and proper rest, but since Leo was already here, it didn't hurt to at least hear him out. How can I help you, today? Jeeves said, once he positioned himself. Considering the high prestige requirement to use his shop, one would think he'd have a lot of free time. I was quite impressed by the suits you made for the 1,000 workers heading out, Lex praised openly. Especially since I could tell that each one boasts commendable protective capabilities. Jeeves, who was clearly still exhausted, snorted at Lex's remark. Commendable? Protective capabilities? My good man, they can walk in the vacuum of space in those suits. They can walk through fire and water, through chaotic spirit energy fields and literal space distortions. Those perfectly soft, air-purifying, energy-filtering suits are not only completely designed to support a wide range of movement, they can survive any kind of environment that can be thrown at them. My good man, the garbs of deities themselves pale in comparison to my suits. That's literally not an over-exaggeration, because those suits can refine divine energy as well. At the Foundation realm, there is literally nothing those soldiers can face which could cause a single stitch in those suits to rip. One of the lads said they are experimenting with teleportation, and wondered if the suit could survive. So I literally lined the suit with a special material, which can literally allow him to swim through the folds of space. PFT, survive. Commendable protective capabilities. Child, you clearly don't have the same vision as the Innkeeper and I, so don't try to boast empty compliments. You'll only embarrass yourself. Chapter 643, Don't Believe in Being Humble. Chapter 643, Don't Believe in Being Humble. If you end up needing to use the battle formation I sent you, do not control it yourself. Have Z take control of the formation. Luther was momentarily stunned when he heard the Innkeeper's voice in his mind, but it all made sense when a mere moment later information regarding a certain battle formation just appeared in his mind. The timing for this couldn't possibly have been better, which proved that even now, the Innkeeper was keeping an eye on them. Look, I don't care where you're from or who your backer is, said a rough-looking man in military uniform holding a tablet. War is not a joke, and can't run on the whim of every little princess who thinks she deserves special accommodation. We need to know the strength level and capability of each and every asset so we can position you accordingly, and be sure you can do your job well. That means we will test everyone individually, and assign them roles as such. If you insist that you're... The man gave a dirty side glance to the paltry 1,000 soldiers among the millions this facility processed every day before continuing. Your group is focused towards group combat, then you need to be tested accordingly, and need to pass the minimum performance threshold. Only, and only then will you be allowed to stay together. If you have a problem with that, take it up with someone who cares. Or better yet, get lost and go back where you came from. I don't have time to babysit you lot. The man had a much higher cultivation realm than Luther and the rest, which is why he remained unaffected by their suppressive aura for the most part. Moreover, he could identify the luxurious material their gear was made from at a glance, and was thus convinced that the group in front of him consisted of nothing but a bunch of untested greenhorns who had simply been showered in expensive equipment. Such people would never last in a real battle. He was extremely irritated at the group, but what he didn't realize was that Luther was irritated too. So what if his cultivation was greater? Luther was not intimidated. So what if he saw larger armies every day? They could not compete with those from the inn. So what if they had countless others coming to fight in their war? They were the ones who had asked the inn to come, not the other way around. "Take me to your testing facility, and be quick about it," said Luther as if he were talking to someone beneath him. "I'm here to fight a war, not stroke the ego of some office worker." Sure, he was normally extremely courteous towards guests at the inn, but that didn't mean everyone deserved such an attitude. Besides, he was not a believer in being humble or down to earth when he had the qualifications to back himself up. Behind his black mask, his expressions were hidden, but the extreme derisive tone of his voice could not be hidden. The soldier talking to Luther turned red, and his anger surged, but he controlled himself. Regardless of what he felt, the discipline of the army had to be maintained, and that was the only thing that kept him from lashing out at Luther. Little did he know, even if he lashed out it would make no difference. Unwilling to speak further, the soldier led Luther and the rest to a testing chamber, completely skipping the queue in which they normally would have had to wait. He sent them in, while he himself went into the control room. "Survive for a minimum of 1 hour," he spoke into a mic, not really bothering to let Luther and the rest get into formation, and began the test at the hardest difficulty. He was breaking more than a few standard operating procedures, and everyone in the room was slightly concerned, but the man was radiating a murderous aura that stopped them from interfering. As an army of Foundation Realm soldiers, the battlefield they were sent to naturally manage their power level. Due to various restrictions and limitations, there were many zones and worlds where the interference of higher-level cultivators was extremely difficult if not downright impossible. That did not change the fact that those regions held crucial strategic value. As such, armies at all power levels were required. Clearly, due to such restrictions, the enemies they would face would at most be slightly more powerful than them. But when the test began at the highest difficulty, what the soldiers from the inn faced was a purely theoretical threat that they were never expected to actually encounter. A nascent-level robot appeared in the testing hall, alongside an army of 5,000 golden core cultivators. The power difference made this a purely impossible force for 1,000 Foundation Realm soldiers to face, and was normally used to test cutting-edge technology or extreme innovations in battle formations. The soldiers from the Midnight Inn, however, did not really know it. Nor were they even alarmed. It wasn't as if none of them had faced a nascent-level cultivator before, and each of them had recently even gotten a power-up from the star rank increase. Still, Luther was not in the mood to do things casually. According to the Innkeeper's orders, you will be in command of our latest battle formation. Let's get this over with, we have better things to do. The opposing force did not wait for them, and was already rushing towards them to attack, yet none of the soldiers from the inn panicked. With extreme precision and efficiency, as if this was not the first time ever they were employing this battle formation, everyone got in position and began channeling their designated techniques. How this worked was that each of them served as an individual gear in a much larger machine, and thus each of them used a different spiritual technique that served no purpose alone, but when done so in tandem with 999 others who were also using corresponding techniques, gave birth to an awesome phenomenon. A black, menacing cloud enveloped the entire army, and a few moments later, when it disappeared, revealed not the soldiers who were standing there previously, but a massive, 45 feet tall, 14 meters, suited mech. Chapter 644 Educated by a Professional. In the testing room, the soldier who had set up the test, as well as everyone else, were all startled by the change. What kind of technique was this? They had seen a lot of different kinds of techniques, but never one that turned an entire army into a seemingly massive robot. To be clear, the battlefield they were currently at was not run by the Jotun Empire, but by a subsidiary force of the Elven Empire. As such, they had a much greater exposure and history than that of humans. Still, this was something completely unprecedented. Moreover, it was not the optics of the situation that was an issue. Even in the control room, separated by a protected wall, they felt a sense of danger. In the testing hall, neither the invading force paused nor the midnight mech. Even Z did not pause to appreciate how awesome this moment felt for him. Since the Innkeeper had trusted him with this responsibility, he would live up to it. Silently, the mech moved. Despite its ridiculous speed, it caused no sound as its lithe and nimble frame moved through the hall, let alone the sonic booms it should have caused due to its velocity. In one single move, which was too fast for those in the control room to see clearly, the mech attacked. A moment later, it appeared in the opposite end of the hall, its back towards the enemies it had crossed. Yet it did not really even need to turn back, for a few seconds later all the attacking robots exploded. Not a single one survived the single attack. The Midnight Battalion, after its first successful combat test, ended their technique, in their daycare faced more of a challenge than this. Dissipating the awesome mech as if it was a mirage. All that was left were 1,000 soldiers, standing there unimpressed. Even the bunnies in their daycare faced more of a challenge than this. Child, you clearly don't have the same vision as the Innkeeper and I, so don't try to boast empty compliments. You'll only embarrass yourself, said Jeeves. He was not happy at all upon receiving a compliment on his work. That was because the person paying the compliment did not even understand enough of what he did to even pay a proper compliment. Lex, on the other hand, did not feel offended by Jeeves' seemingly rude attitude. First of all, the man was seriously sleep-deprived, so he could not be blamed for being grumpy. Secondly, so long as he did a good job, why did it matter if he had a bit of an attitude? Like I was saying, the suit you made thoroughly impressed me. I wanted to order one for myself as well. It hardly surprised Jeeves to hear as such. Who wouldn't want his suits? Rather, it was the fact that Leo could even order a suit from him that was curious. Just because they were workers at the inn did not mean they could so easily be exempted from the privilege requirements. Similar to how there were privileges for guests, the official workers of the inn were also ranked based on how long they had worked, their performance, customer satisfaction, etc. The only reason why it was not relevant before was because Lex was manually setting up privilege requirements, so he never put them up for his workers. The tailor shop, however, naturally had a restriction on it, so the same applied to the workers. Still, monitoring workers' ranks was not Jeeves' job. Since Leo was here, the man clearly had the qualification. What kind of suit do you have in mind? He asked, as he massaged his temples. Even if he didn't plan on working immediately on the suit, he took his job very seriously. As such, he needed all his presence of mind for when he took orders. I have a very unique problem, Leo confessed as he scratched his head. I don't really care about defense or protection, as it's already very hard for anything to hurt me. Instead, I just want clothes that are extremely durable, so that I won't end up naked while fighting or facing a dangerous situation. Since my body is so durable, I end up facing more extreme situations than anyone else would normally face. Jeeves nodded as he took in Leo's requirements and ran a few ideas through his mind. Any style requirements? He asked. You did a good job with the previous suits, so I'll defer to your judgment on that. Jeeves nodded once again, as if that was the correct answer. What about your budget? Let's just say my budget is big. So long as my needs can be met, the price is irrelevant. Jeeves nodded once more. That's what he liked to hear. But instead of continuing to ask Leo questions, Jeeves moved from behind the counter and approached him. He put an arm around Leo's shoulder and patted it a few times before he spoke. Child, I understand your requirements. But I have a small suggestion, a small amendment to your requirements, if you will. As a professional, it is my job to educate you about the possibilities even you don't realize. Jeeves paused, and then sighed. He was truly exhausted, so it was hard to focus. But at the same time, inspiration filled him, and he needed to get it out. Imagine you're facing a foe, he said, waving his hand out in front of them, as if that would conjure up an image of Leo fighting an enemy. Imagine your foe's desperation, his sheer tenacity and will as he uses everything he can to fight you. Imagine that he fails, but manages to escape. Through planning and scheming, and unsavory alliances, the foe returns, this time prepared better to face you. Through the culmination of all his hard work, he finally manages to pierce through your nigh indestructible armor, your suit. He tastes the sweet nectar of ambrosia as he finally succeeds, peeling away your defense, leaving you vulnerable to harm. For surely someone who relies on such resilient armor must be weak himself, right? He is at his zenith, only to fall to an agonizing and hellish nadir when he realizes that your defense is higher still than your seemingly impenetrable armor. Why, he roars to the heavens moments before you strike him down. Why would someone as strong as you even need such an indestructible armor, he wonders in his last moments. The answer, it is simple. You may not really need that extra bit of defense, but since your foes don't know that, why not frustrate them a little? You see, lad, that is called playing with your enemies. For a moment, Lex was startled. Then, he grinned. Chapter 645 Lex is fat. Lex felt like he was meeting Jeeves for the first time, and he quite liked it. Even if his prior meeting had not been extremely brief, how could Jeeves show off his sadistic side in front of the innkeeper? He had been on his best behavior. But now, in front of Leo, in his extremely sleep-deprived state, Jeeves has thoroughly lost all inhibition, and so let his true self show. What Lex didn't realize was that his true self was not a sadist as he made it seem like, no. His true self was an artist, and he exhibited his art through his suits. The appearance of the suit was just the surface of the art. The functionality of the suit is what gave his art depth. I like the idea, confirmed Lex. What are the limits of what you can do with the suit? Currently, the shop has a limit on the kinds of materials I can access. The materials I can access are on the nascent realm level, at most. If you can bring me better materials from outside, I can improve the suit further, but until then you would have to make do. Having said that, even at the nascent realm, the kinds of materials I have access to are numerous. How many things you want to add to the suit play a great role in how I can use the materials. For example, with my previous suits, although they may seem impressive to you, I was actually severely limited in what I could do. It was not budgetary constraints that stopped me, nor was it the material. Instead, it was the physical strength and power level of those who were going to wear it. Just because it looks like a suit does not mean that it has to be light. The more leeway I have, the more I can be liberal with the kinds of materials I can use. You'll understand more in a moment. Come, let me take your measurements. Jeeves took off his coat and folded it over his arm as he led Lex deeper into the mansion. Each room and corridor had walls lined with various fabrics in a seemingly infinite number of colors. The truth was, the number of colors the tailor's shop was catering to far exceeded the spectral range humans could see, which is why there was such a need for such a vast collection. The true, genuinely valuable materials weren't even stored here. They were in a basement, stored in isolated, temperature-controlled rooms. The materials were so volatile, they needed to undergo various kinds of treatments before they could be added into suits. You said I can bring materials from outside. What kind of materials do you mean? Should I be looking for some alien sheep producing celestial cotton or something? My young, ignorant lad, if you can get your hands on celestial cotton, or better yet an animal capable of producing celestial cotton, you'll become an instant multi-billionaire. Every inch of it is worth several 100 million MP, and that's in its unrefined form. Heck, I don't even have the facilities to process it, so better not waste your time daydreaming about that. No, a more realistic expectation would be to get your hands on precious ores, woods, and other natural materials which have unique qualities. Turning them into fabric will be my task. The two continued to casually chat for a while until they reached a small room filled with strips of fabric, multiple mannequins, and various kinds of inch tapes. Stand here please, Jeeves said as he pointed to a small, circular pedestal. He put his coat aside, rolled up his sleeves, and grabbed a yellow measuring tape, before hanging it around his neck like a doctor with a stethoscope. He put on a pair of glasses that hung delicately on his nose, and stood at the ready to start measuring Lex. Lex hadn't really had a personalized suit made before, so he did not know what the measuring process would entail, but it definitely did not include the extreme raise in gravity that he experienced as soon as he stepped on the pedestal. If Lex had to guess, the gravity was at least twice or thrice that of Earth, yet it kept increasing exponentially. Of course, such an increase posed no burden to Lex for the moment, as his body was extremely strong. But the pedestal wasn't trying to test his physical limits, so it never pushed him to the maximum of what he could manage. Instead, it was trying to determine his comfort range. At the exact moment he felt even the slightest bit of strain due to the increased gravity, the pedestal immediately returned to normal. Jeeves started writing something down in his notes as he walked around Lex with a clipboard. After a couple of moments, the temperature around Lex began increasing. Similar to what happened with the gravity, it stopped the moment Lex's body displayed even the hint of becoming uncomfortable. Then, after returning to normal, the temperature started to drop. "Raise your hands, please," Jeeves said, prompting Leo to raise them to his sides. He was standing like a massive T, but Jeeves still did not approach him to measure the length of his arms. Instead, two parrots, one red and one blue, appeared and sat on his palms. An unusual energy was channeled through their claws into Lex's body, or at least tried to. Piercing his skin and entering his body turned out to be a greater challenge than Jeeves expected. The man was actually surprised when there was no result for a couple of minutes, but eventually, the energies managed to enter Lex's body. They were not harming him in any way. Instead, it appeared as if they were mapping Lex's meridians that covered the surface of his body. Understanding how your body interacts with energy, and where your body's channels are, is crucial to designing a suit, Jeeves explained while the process continued. Even if I'm making the ultimate defensive suit, I cannot forget to augment your body's basic functions as best as possible. The process was painfully slow, and took almost 20 minutes, but Jeeves did not seem irritated at the slow progress. Instead, he was very pleased. Such a high-quality body would be able to don an extremely high-quality, yet equally taxing suit. A glass tube appeared around the pedestal and sealed Lex in, before water began to fill it. Once the tube was completely filled, the pressure the water exerted on Lex's body began increasing. At the same time, millions of tiny fish swam out, and began measuring each and every hair on Lex's body. That genuinely made him awkward. The system had once accused him of having a hairy back, which wasn't exactly false, but he felt like the system greatly exaggerated. Lex would not shy away from taking his shirt off in public. But when each individual hair was being measured. Of course, none of the fish came near Lex's private parts. Mostly after the water, Lex was subjected to multiple other strange and unexpected tests that measured his body's performance, and because he kept it blocked with a thick and dangerous layer of his spirit sense. After the water, Lex was subjected to multiple other strange and unexpected tests that measured his body's performance and capabilities. There was even one that detected the level of body odor he produced. When the process finally ended, Lex sighed in relief. These measurements were really too intense. "Would you like to read your results?" Jeeves asked, as he continued to note stuff down. Guests often become curious. "Sure, why not," said Lex as he walked up to him and glanced at the clipboard. Two measurements in particular genuinely surprised Lex. The first was his height. He had reached 6 feet 3 inches, 190 centimeters. His height had increased. Granted, the increase was not massive, but he hadn't even noticed the small change. He wondered if it was a result of his cultivation, or the multiple refinements his body underwent. There was no way of knowing. But what really surprised, and in fact devastated him, was his weight. The last time he checked his weight, or at least what he remembered, he was 185 pounds, 83 kilograms. That was quite a lot for his height, which meant that he was a little fat. Or that he had a lot of muscle. It was totally the second one. But now, Now he was a massive and unfathomable 712 pounds, 325 kilograms. With his mouth hung open, Lex looked down at his muscular and chiseled body. He couldn't claim to be fat, but it wasn't as if he was bulging out muscles either. What was up with that weight? In the end, he could only reluctantly accept the fact that all the materials he had absorbed into his body had increased his weight substantially. It was fortunate that he wasn't weight-conscious at all, or else he would have been crying over these results. He totally wasn't doing that right now. His eyes were just shining and glistening due to how clear and beautiful they were. Chapter 646 Spreading the News. The measurement process was unusual, to say the least. By the end of it, Jeeves drew up a few mock designs as well to show Lex and get his feedback. Through the process, where Lex learned more and more about the suits and what they could do, he eventually realized that they were going to be much more useful to him than he anticipated. For now, the suit he was getting aimed at being a general, all-purpose one that he could use in his day-to-day matters, but already he had thought of various other suits he could have made. For example, the few times where he hunted with Fenrir, he realized the wolf's stealth capabilities were extremely useful. While Lex could not replicate them, he had the Orion scales, which could be used for the same purpose. In fact, he already handed them over to Jeeves and asked him to make a second suit, for the express purpose of stealth. That would take a while, as Jeeves would have to make the first suit first, then process Orion scales and then use the fabric made from it to make the suit, which would be completely different. Unlike the previous 1,000 suits, which had been made in a rush, Lex's suit gave Jeeves a lot more leeway to do as he wished, and so the making of the suit would take much longer. Once Jeeves had properly rested, it would take about a week to deliver both suits. That was a long time, considering Jeeves had no other orders, but Lex did not complain. He simply paid a deposit of 100 million MP and then left. With no other tasks left to distract or occupy him, Lex was now finally free to return to the Crystal Realm. Fueled by a sense of urgency, if it were up to Lex, he would immediately depart on his journey to find Valesco, yet it was not meant to be. The last time he was here, Jolene, the mother of Fardy's fiancé, had requested Lex facilitate her in the handover of some secret items over to someone else. Naturally, the handover had been successful, and now Jolene wanted to expand the scope of their cooperation. Lex had been dealing with the matter using his projection, but he felt he might benefit if he went and took a look at matters firsthand, as his instincts would play a better role then. But even that was a secondary matter. The first thing he had to deal with was the Trollope from whom Lex had taken the cosmic erosion elixir. Lex had scooped all the elixir away and teleported to the inn while he was still in the Trollope's territory, so naturally when he returned to the Crystal Realm, that's where he reappeared. The first thing he noticed once he returned was that the area already looked much better. The massive crowd that had gathered trying to reach the elixir had dispersed, and all the dead and decayed plants nearby had been removed. In fact, new saplings had already been planted and Lex could see that they were growing at an abnormally fast pace. He could only accredit that to Toro, the Trollope controlling the area. One thing he had noticed, though vaguely, was that the Trollopes he had encountered all seemed ridiculously powerful. Even when compared to other races in the same realm, Trollopes maintained an overwhelming advantage. It was while Lex was musing on the incredible strength of Trollopes that a familiar fish made of grass and seaweed appeared in the distance, swimming towards him. Lex waited patiently for the Trollope to arrive, and greeted him immediately. "Good day, Senior. I hope you have not been troubled once again after I resolved the issue last time. You and you goddamn etiquettes." Toro roared in frustration as soon as he heard Lex speak. Regardless of how unusual this particular Trollope may be, Lex remembered the importance of remaining extremely polite and respectful with him. "I will take that as if everything is well." "You're goddamn right, everything is well," he said in frustration. As soon as that stinking liquid disappeared, everything quickly returned to normal, or close enough. "What the hell was that thing? How did you get rid of it? How can you teleport within my territory without my permission?" Lex smiled weakly. He was not sure if he should reveal what he had learned, but then decided it was better to reveal what he knew than to hide it. Clearly something was wrong with this realm, and in the off chance that the anomaly was not common knowledge, the entire realm could be in jeopardy. He did not want the destruction of an entire realm on his conscience, just so that he could benefit a little from this situation first. Originally, I did not know what the elixir was as well, so I went to consult a senior. Lex produced a golden key, and threw it towards Toro. You can use this golden key to go to a place known as the Midnight Inn. I used it too, that's how I was able to teleport away. There, I consulted a senior and learned that the liquid was called Cosmic Erosion Elixir. I obviously do not understand the specifics of the matter, but the senior told me that the liquid is only formed when an entire realm is destabilizing and on the path to destruction. Lex paused and waited to see the Trollops' reaction. Based on his bombastic personality, he was expecting a great response, but no such thing came. At first, Lex quickly assumed that knowledge of the realm's impending demise was common knowledge. But then, when he looked at the lost face of the Trollop, another theory popped up in his mind. Before he could verify his theory, the Trollop confirmed it for him by asking, "What the goddamn hell is a realm, and what does it have to do with my territory?" Chapter 647, Suddenly Protective. Lex had a difficult time explaining to Toro what a realm was, though Lex had a sneaking suspicion that the Trollop understood the concept somewhere in the middle of the explanation, but was just venting its frustration on Lex. When it finally understood, Toro displayed a remarkable amount of not screaming at Lex randomly. Instead, it became silent as it contemplated the ramifications of what it had heard. The issue that it was facing was not the destruction of its entire world that was a given based on the situation. The issue was that Lex did not have a solid grasp of the timeline. According to what Lex said, the appearance of the elixir meant that the realm was on the path to destruction, but the fact that it was on that path also meant that it could be veered off that path. The top minds of the realm would think of ways to work on the issue, but it all depended on how long they had. If one thought of the timeline in terms of the geographic timescale of planets in the origin realm, even millions of years were considered a short time. Theoretically, since the realm was even bigger than planets, the timeline should similarly be greater, right? But not only was there no way of confirming how long they had, there was also no way of knowing just how bad the situation had become. Maybe the elixir had already started appearing across the crystal realm hundreds of millions of years ago, and this was just its latest occurrence. All in all, there was too much uncertainty. Do not spread this information lightly, Toro finally said after contemplating for a while. Spreading panic will not help anyone. I will contact the elders of my race to see what they know. In the meantime, I suggest you find a way to contact the crystal race. Regardless of what anyone says, they are the true rulers of this realm. If the other races are allowed to exist, it is through their will. If the Craven are allowed to invade, it is due to their indifference. The true might of that race is not what common folk can understand. As it happens, I was intending to meet an elder of the crystal race to begin with, said Lex. He told me to meet him in a city known as Valesco. Do you have any idea where it might be? I'm sorry, we Trollops do not usually care much for things outside of our own territories. I do not know the land. You are better off asking one of your human leaders. The fish, before it went away, extended a small brown root and broke it off, before handing it to Lex. If you encounter any Trollops on your way, show them this. So long as you do not threaten them in any way, they will not cause you any trouble. In fact, not only will they avoid causing trouble, they will even go out of their way to assist in your travels. Lex observed the small root and couldn't really determine what was so special about it, but he kept it anyway. After saying that, Toro swam away, not really bothering to keep Lex company. He was clearly very disturbed by the news. Lex, too, saw no reason to delay, so he began returning towards the inn, this time with a bit more urgency. Instead of walking calmly on the seabed, which his ridiculous weight and small frame made so easy, he swam to speed up. When he eventually reached Babylon, he attracted a bit more attention coming out of the water than he did going in, but no one really bothered to question him. When he returned to the tavern, he was ready to send one of the workers to go and call Jolene from her residence, but discovered that there was an unusually jovial mood at the tavern. There was an entire group of mildly intoxicated men, singing and dancing on the stage while the onlookers played music by slamming their tables in synchronization with one another. The triplets were busy serving more drinks, and even they could not contain the grins on their faces. "What's going on?" Lex asked Roan, the barkeep who was efficiently pouring out drinks without spilling a single drop. "I think it'll be best if you ask Big Ben," he replied, a soft smile even on his face. Curious, Lex immediately scanned the tavern and discovered that Big Ben too was dancing and singing, but with a whole host of people on the rooftop terrace. As the security of the facility, he was usually up front, but today he was the farthest possible from his post. "What are we all celebrating?" he asked when he finally reached the top. Unfortunately, due to his excellent senses and sharp hearing, the surprise was already spoiled for him, but he still pretended not to know. Still, there was a smile on his face. "Betty's expecting," the man roared, drunkenly. "The doctor said so." "It's official." Lex's smile widened and he grabbed the man by the shoulder, making sure he didn't fall over. "Congratulations, man." "Where is she?" "I want to congratulate her too." Big Ben erupted into a roar of laughter upon being asked the question, and when he was finally able to stop he managed to say, "She's still at the hospital fighting. She said she won't come back until she finds a doctor who will tell her it's okay to drink while she's expecting." Lex smiled weakly as concern suddenly filled him. "Do not worry, I'll talk to Roan. We'll give her the best tea during this time. She won't miss drinking at all." Big Ben was too busy laughing to hear what Lex said, so he left him to his party. Suddenly a thought occurred to him. Was he supposed to reprimand Ben for drinking on the job? Shaking his head, he quickly returned to the ground floor to pass out his instructions. For reasons he couldn't fully understand, he suddenly felt quite protective of Big Ben and Betty. Since they were a part of the Midnight family, he would take great care of them. That also included not letting this realm get destroyed. Chapter 648 Simple Things. Lex was sitting in silence inside the private room, tapping his index finger on the armrest of his sofa. The sound of singing and merrymaking could faintly be heard from outside, though that was only because Lex left the door slightly open. After all the harrowing experiences everyone in this tavern went through, it was a wonder they could still celebrate like this. But at the same time, it was because they had all gone through such tough times together that they were so close. Lex, too, had to admit that he felt a special bond for all these people who had been beside him during his very stressful time of being stuck away from the inn. It was for that specific reason that he was feeling slightly stressed right now. He did not know much about his surrounding areas, and how far his destination was. To curb that, he had begun asking the locals a bit about the neighboring states or towns, or anything else that they knew of. Most of them had very limited knowledge. They all lived in the area controlled by the Noel family all their lives, and at most knew the names of neighboring nobles and their states. They had no idea regarding any information relating to other nations at all. He somewhat missed the highly advanced Hum Nation and the Academy. There, a simple search on their local portal was all it would have taken to get all the information he needed. Lex's expression stirred as he heard a familiar voice in the main hall, and turned to look at the door. A few moments later, the door was opened by Rick, who was followed by a few people. Jolene was naturally among them, for he wanted to see if his instincts reacted to her. As it happened, Bertram Noel was also there. This was great, for Lex had also extended an invitation to him. Lex was hoping to learn how he could make his way to the Crystal Nation through him. Surely he would know more, right? But there was a third, unexpected person there as well. The young and slightly tanned woman bore a strong resemblance to Jolene, but unlike her smiling mother, she wore a very stern and serious expression. This was, no doubt, the daughter Jolene wanted Lex to work with in the planning of Jasmine's and Fardy's wedding. He only gave her a cursory glance before turning his attention back to the other two. "Jolene, Bertram, I'm glad you both could make it," said Lex as he stood up to greet them. Naturally he put on his best smile, and did not let any of his internal concerns show on his face. "It's no trouble at all," said Jolene, her eyes fixed on Lex with a feverish gaze. "Besides, I was planning on visiting you soon anyway. I have to introduce my daughter, and our soon-to-be liaison for the wedding preparations. This is Jess, one of my most hardworking and accomplished daughters." "It's a pleasure to meet you," Lex said politely, and Jess only nodded in return. It seemed like for liaison, she wasn't exactly very talkative. But that suited Lex just fine, so it did not matter. Especially since Lex wanted to keep as much of a distance from Jolene as possible. After she and her family had discovered the Midnight Inn, Jolene had become almost fanatical in her admiration for Lex. It was quite a nuisance, even when he was merely dealing with her using a projection. "Unfortunately, Jess' arrival also means it is time for me to leave. We have decided the date for the wedding. It will be held in 6 months exactly, and there are too many matters for us to deal with to make it happen on such short notice." "Will you be traveling a lot during this time?" Lex asked, genuinely curious. The person who he truly wanted to converse with was Aegis, but that fellow had disappeared for a while. Let alone the tavern, he was not even showing up at the inn, so there was no way for Lex to ask him for any routes. The next best option was naturally Jolene, for her family was deeply connected to the rulers of Hum Nation. The best option after that was the Noel family, probably. Yes, unfortunately, familial affairs are the most complicated. A lot of our guests need to be invited personally, and certain matters and deals need to be taken care of during this time as well. We will even need to pay a visit to the Hum Nation and inform the royal family about the wedding. Being a parent is truly too complicated. N0 valuous B.C0M. Won't that take too long? How will you reach the Hum Nation from here? For ordinary people, it would indeed take quite a while, informed Bertram. But the influence of the nations extends even beyond their own borders. Even though these lands are far away from the empires, separated by vast oceans and extremely inhospitable lands, many nobles have short and long-range teleportation formations within their territories. Anyone bearing a token of one of the nation's royal families can use those formations at will. This was both good and bad news. The good news was that there were apparently many teleportation formations he could possibly access, but the bad news was that the distance between Babylon and the nations seemed to be great. What if I wanted to send someone on an errand? Do you think they could get access to those formations? Bertram paused, and an awkward look appeared on his face. It seemed like he was not anticipating such a question. As far as he knew, Lex was not as simple as he made it appear on the surface. Not only was he himself an incredible powerhouse, pretending to be a weakling, but he also had the backing of the mysterious Midnight Inn. He did not want to offend Lex by giving him an answer he might not like, but... "Oh yes, of course. Why not?" exclaimed Jolene as she suddenly saw an opportunity. From her spatial ring, she summoned a large bronze token which had a pickaxe engraved across its front. As far as emblems went, a pickaxe was not a prestigious symbol, but it was most befitting the Philip clan, which was allowed to mine Ethereum under the royal family's command. Although this is not the same as a token from the royal family of the Hum Nation, this is a token of my Philip's family. It may not get you the same kind of service, but it will definitely enable you to access the teleportation formations. Unfortunately, you will not be exempt from paying for the use. I would give you the royal family's token if I could, but I am not really allowed to give it out, you understand. No need, this is already a great help, said Lex, accepting the token. Although she harbored ulterior motives in helping him, Lex wouldn't deny help that he needed. You aren't the one who has to go on a trip, right? Jolene suddenly asked, as if it just occurred to her. If you are, I can send along an escort. No need, Lex said, doing his best to keep his lip from twitching. I will be here, making sure everything is in order for the upcoming wedding. But, I have to send someone on a rather urgent task all the way to the Crystal Nation, to a city called Valesco. Would you happen to know where it is? Even before the duo had the opportunity to answer, he felt like he got an answer. Both Bertram and Jolene had a change in their expression, though they swiftly controlled themselves. Still, Lex felt like he could detect shock and fear from them. The path to the Crystal Nation from here is different from the one to the Hum Nation. The formations will not be enough to send you on your way, and you will have to cross certain areas yourself. It's not really an easy path. I will consult my father and have a map drawn for you to help your helper on his journey. But while I can help you find your way to the Crystal Nation, finding your way to Valesco, I think only someone from the Crystal race can help you with that. Why is that? Lex asked, curious. Well, technically I cannot even confirm if what I know is true. But there are rumors that the Crystal race has a massive prison where they punish members of their race who have committed unforgivable crimes. A prison, so old that no one is sure when it was made, filled with immortal prisoners too dangerous to ever be allowed free again, yet kept alive because killing them is too light of a punishment. The name of that prison is Valesco. Despite his resilience, Lex sighed. Why were things never just simple? Chapter 649 Ash. The conversation with the Dua about the distance to the Crystal Nation did not last too long. Unlike the other races, which had a clear positive or negative relationship with one another, the Crystal race equally shunned all the other races. They kept their territories closed, and did not usually bother much with the outside world. That did not mean that no one was allowed to enter their nation, just that they were extremely selective in who entered. In a way, one would have to prove themselves worthy of interacting with the Crystal race. The duo mentioned nothing about that, for they assumed that Lex already had some kind of relationship with the Crystal race if he was heading over, and they were technically correct. Lex did not have much else to discuss with Bertram, as the man had already promised to provide Lex with a map leading to his destination. That would have to suffice for now, though the two were still being very vague about how far the nation was. That was Lex's next great concern. The Crystal Realm was as big as the entire solar system, and if the distance between him and his destination was equal to the distance between planets, it would take forever to reach. He could only hope there were enough teleportation formations. He did, however, have something left to discuss with Jolene, and even Jess. Fortunately, it appeared as though Jolene knew about it and on her own requested that they have a word in private. N0ValuSB.C0M. Lex manipulated space and created a separate room around the two of them, putting up opaque barriers so that no one could lip read what they were about to discuss. Are you satisfied with the results of your request? Lex asked, without waiting for her to broach the topic. It was as if he already knew what she was going to talk about. A random stranger had left a box with unknown contents at the tavern, with the hope to use the place as a drop-off point for certain items, allowing Jolene to take the box at a later date. It was a discreet way of passing along whatever it is she wanted delivered, as she would never actually cross paths with whoever was delivering the package. At first, she had only left a package at the inn for 3 days, testing to see if the tavern was capable of isolating its aura. Once she discovered that it actually could, she had the real package delivered to the tavern to collect it herself later. All of this was fine, as far as Lex was concerned. Or at least, it would have been normally. The fact that it seemed like Lex was aiding and abetting improbably illegal, or at least highly suspicious behavior, did not faze him. What got to him was the fact that the aura from Jolene's package was extremely repulsive. The box she had left at the inn to test if the aura leaked already disgusted Lex, even though he had no idea what it contained. The actual package itself was even worse. Technically speaking, Lex's real body had not been here when the package was delivered and received, but even the aura it left behind was so strong that Lex was still disgusted by it when he felt it. Whatever the package was, illegal or not, he decided he no longer wanted to facilitate it. Although the purpose of the inn and tavern was to host all guests equally without discrimination, Lex was not a mindless slave of the system's directives. Since it was disgusting to him, he no longer wanted a part in it. Extremely, Jolene stated with a massive smile. You do not know how much you have helped me with this. I'm glad you are satisfied with our service, Lex said with a soft smile. That is also why I feel extremely regretful to inform you that the tavern will not be able to help you in such an endeavor in the future. Jolene was genuinely startled, as she was not expecting such an answer, especially since the previous exchange had gone off without a hitch. Can I ask why?" she asked hesitantly. She did not forget Lex's powerful aura, so she was hesitant to get on his bad side. Yet at the same time, this task was genuinely too important to her to let go of so easily. "Rest assured, you did not break any rules of the tavern, and so there will be no effect on any other services you acquire from the tavern. But the matter of fact is, while I usually do not interfere in the matters of guests, the aura of the item you exchanged was. I found it too revolting. I did not investigate its contents, for I thoroughly respect the privacy of all my guests, but I cannot, in good conscience, continue to facilitate this exchange." A hint of fear appeared on Jolene's face, despite the fact that Lex said he did not investigate the contents. This was an extremely sensitive matter, which she could not risk exposing, but at the same time could not give up either. Since Lex did not want to help out anymore, she would have to figure out another way. "Please do not misunderstand," she explained while smiling weakly. "My transactions are not what they might appear to be. These are related to an extremely important issue that needs resolving. But since you do not want to facilitate them anymore, I will not bother you with them anymore. Not that it matters, as I am scheduled to depart soon anyway." They talked a bit more while Lex ensured that he was not drawing any conclusions about her affairs, and simply did not want to participate in this particular one anymore. Once they were done, Lex removed the barriers, ending their private conversation. "I'll leave you and Jess to it," Jolene suddenly said, standing up. "There are countless matters relating to the wedding to get to, so there's no doubt you two will be holed up together for quite a while." Amazingly, Jolene was completely back to her normal self, returning to her antics of trying to set up Lex with her daughter. "I wish I could stay and help, but I just dropped by to introduce you to Jess. She can get in contact with me at any time, and if for some reason she can't, she knows full well what to do for the wedding." Jess, with an extremely serious face, nodded, as if accepting a task that would determine the life or death of millions. But while Lex joked in his mind, he was unaware that this wedding really would be such an affair. The interest of the nation, and thereby any family connected to its interests, determined the life or death of billions on the regular. "I'm sure our cooperation will bear fruitful results. Believe it or not, I'd say I'm more invested in making this wedding a success than even you." Jolene smiled at Lex's remark, but she was unaware that he really did care more about it than anyone else. He was determined to get a SSS Plus ranking for this quest. Once Bertram and Jolene departed, Lex was left alone with Jess, who silently stared at him. Rather than feel like an awkward silence was building, Lex felt relieved. If she was as determined as her mother and her ulterior motive, Lex would find this matter quite problematic to handle, but since she wasn't, things would be simple. "Although we have 6 months until the wedding, I don't think we should waste a single moment," said Lex with a warm and confident smile. "Do you?" Before Jess had an opportunity to reply, Lex stood up and opened the door to the private room, waving at Roan to send someone in. As soon as he got this quest, he had delegated a lot of research tasks to the planning division, and even asked Mary to look up the best wedding consultants they could find, not to mention conduct extensive research on Indian wedding culture. What he did not expect to learn was that there was such an expert within his own planning division. The moment he learned about her, he decided to bring her to the Crystal Realm and have her help out. A tall, caramel-skinned woman walked with, dressed quite casually instead of the usual formal wear associated with the inn. Yet even in a t-shirt and pants, she looked stunning, though one should not expect less from a worker at the inn. "This is an expert I've called in who will be handling a lot of the wedding preparations. Since you'll be working closely together, why don't you guys introduce yourselves?" The woman from the planning division looked at Jess, and gave her a soft, welcoming smile as if she was looking forward to working together. "Hi Jess," she said, her voice calm yet confident. "My name is Aishwarya Rai, but my friends call me Ash. It's a pleasure to meet you." Chapter 650 Warm Up. Jess was startled by everything that had happened, especially since she had been informed by her mother that she would be working closely with Lex. Jess was a perfectionist, so any task she did with the aim of achieving perfection. This was both a boon and a flaw. On one hand, everything she did achieved perfection, catapulting her reputation not only amongst her own family, but the general public as well. On the other hand, she barely ever ended up doing anything, because the more matters she picked up, the less time she would have to achieve perfection in each one. For this upcoming wedding, she had started working the absolute moment she heard about it. In fact, to aid her in achieving the best possible task, she even asked her family to compile an extensively detailed file on the Midnight Tavern so she could research it thoroughly. She had, in her opinion, perfectly worked out Lex's personality, and mentally prepared herself accordingly so that they could achieve maximum efficiency in attaining results. As for her mother's wish for them to fall in love with each other, she knew nothing. After all, her one-track mind could not handle multiple projects at the same time. But from the very start, a wrench had been thrown into her plans. Who was this Ash? Where did she come from? She was not in the file Jess had studied. Moreover, why did it seem like Lex was transferring his responsibilities to others? The pleasure is mine, Jess said, shaking Ash's hand. But then she immediately turned to Lex and said, when you say we'll be working closely together, do you mean that you won't be the one handling the wedding preparations? Lex smiled. Since he knew Jolene was setting some kind of love trap for him, why would he be stupid enough to stay put? Of course the first thing he did was look for someone to take his place. But he was not just shirking his duties, he had grander plans for the wedding than anyone knew, and only he could fulfill them. Yes and no, he said. You and Ash will be handling the normal sequence of events and handle the bulk of the tasks. But that does not mean I won't be doing anything. You may not know this, but Pfardy and I are old friends, so naturally I want to make this wedding amazing as well. As such, I will be handling a special task which, if I succeed in, will take this wedding up by another level. Jess looked skeptical, but Lex was sincere. From the moment he had received this quest, he had been thinking about how he could make it worthy of an SSS Plus ranking. Having over-the-top theatrics was, of course, necessary, but that would not be enough. Lex had some experience in completing quests with extremely high rankings, but each time it was more to do with luck than his own performance. Whether it was the appearance of 2 demi-daylords, or an actual dowlord, it was not something he could have anticipated or arranged. But the experience had taught him something. Although his quests may seem random, they all were ultimately linked to the Midnight Inn. As an inn, one of the most prideful things was that important or powerful guests made an appearance. There were probably more layers involved in determining his quest ranking, but it could not be denied that that was a major one. As such, Lex had been thinking along the lines of who he could invite to make this wedding the best or most prestigious. Originally he was thinking that Aegis would have to do, but now he had a better idea. The realm itself was being destroyed. If Lex could reach the crystal race in time, and convince them of what was happening, he could use his vast experience in manipulating. He meant his vast experience in persuading people to have the crystal race treat this wedding as a kind of conference. If a simple wedding between 2 human nobles ended up inviting the leaders of all the nations in this realm, he would consider that as an excellent wedding. He did not know if such a thing would be enough, or if he could even pull it off, but for now, that was the best plan he had. Jess tried asking Lex what he had planned, and convincing him to once again take over planning, but he would not listen. Since he was planning on leaving anyway, he would only be here in the form of his projection anyway. As such, he was only planning on handling and resolving emergencies. His entire personal focus would be on reaching the Crystal Empire. He hoped he could reach it in enough time to set up the meeting with everyone, and make it back as well. The following day, 24 hours later, since the concept of day and night was screwed up here, Bertram returned to the inn and handed Lex a leather scroll. This was not at all what Lex was expecting when he had been told he was getting a map, but it would have to do. Instead of detailing the entire terrain and surrounding areas, the map just listed a path using prominent landmarks as markers. It would have to suffice. With everything in hand, Lex departed from Babylon, making sure not to be spotted as he did. After all, he was supposed to be inside the tavern this entire time. After a solid 6 hours of running at his top speed, Lex finally stopped and pulled out the map. Fortunately, other than visual markers, the map also recorded auras and spiritual markers, which Lex could track using his spirit sense and intuition. Or better yet, he summoned Fenrir, who was sleeping, and woke up the pup. He climbed onto its back, and held out the map for it to sniff. "Follow these auras," Lex told the excited little wolf. "Think of this as, we're going on a long walk, through an endless park, filled with monsters and unknown dangers. Also, we're on a time limit, so you better run fast." Fenrir held in excitement and began running. Every word Lex had said excited it more than the last. A single spaceship was moving through space, unbothered by the much larger ships nearby. Each battlefront with the Fugan was different, in many ways. The battlefront in which Alexander had fought was artificially created, and seemed like an endless plain. This one, which the Midnight Battalion was being brought through, consisted of an unusual region of space enveloped by a cosmic cloud. Normal cosmic clouds were vast regions of space containing gas, dust and other small particles, which brought about the appearance of a cloud. Yet this one not only contained hundreds of rogue planets, it also contained currents of chaos energy, a form of extremely concentrated spiritual energy that not even normal immortals could handle. The interference from the chaos energy made it so that the actual contents of this cosmic cloud had been hidden for millions of years, serving as a breeding ground for Fugan forces. N0V-LESB.C0M. When it was finally discovered, it naturally suffered an all-out assault. The rogue planet that the Midnight Battalion was being taken to was an extremely volatile, yet extremely important one. According to the briefing Luther got, the planet had some extremely valuable resources that were hard to find in entire galaxies, so taking control of the planet was of the highest priority. Yet the planet also had an unstable core, so it could not tolerate fights between higher-level cultivators. Moreover, bombarding it from space was also out of the equation, because that would not only risk further destabilizing it, but also risk destroying the resources. The man briefing Luther made it very clear that to the leaders of this war, those resources were a lot more valuable than all of their lives, so he better perform well. The reason they were being led to such an important site as their first deployment was due to their excellent rating and performance. It seemed that the battalion had developed a reputation without even setting foot on the battlefield. Of course, to Luther, none of that mattered. He was indifferent to his superior's purposes and reasoning. He simply didn't care. His one and only objective was to ensure that no one from the inn died. As the spaceship approached the planet, Luther looked out at it from one of the screens projecting the outside, then turned to his comrades. "Once, when I was talking to one of the inn's oldest guests, I heard him say something extremely profound." Luther did not raise his voice, but it carried to everyone in the room, attracting their attention. He said the best defense, the best way to protect yourself, is to kill your enemies before they have a chance to attack. He paused, and looked at the soldiers from the inn. "Within 1 month, I want the planet wiped of all hostiles. That will be our warm-up for this war. Let's go." Chapter 651 Boring. The ship carrying all the soldiers did not land on the planet. In fact, it did not even enter the atmosphere, for the planet was infested with hordes of mindless yet violent aliens. They were one of the many species that had been bred especially for wars against planets. The Fugan were, in fact, not the first to use such tactics, though currently they were the ones employing it the most in the Origin realm. The concept was simple. Once any civilization reached a certain level, and grew enough, they would gain the means of genetic manipulation, whether through technology or spiritual techniques or something else. With such advancements, there naturally came military applications. Although uncommon, when larger civilizations wage war against one another, it is often too intensive on human resources to invade each and every planet or strategic location. They would create fast reproducing aliens to overpower or weaken the planet's inhabitants. Through long-lasting wars of attrition, the planet was usually either overwhelmed, or was at the very least greatly weakened, all without the ones responsible putting in any real effort. Of course, the perpetrators themselves naturally retained the means to combat this engineered alien species in case they ever needed to take the planet themselves. There were many ways of managing this with circumnavigating the Henali prohibition on genocide, such as the case with the devils and zombies. Of course, in the case of the Fugan, there was no need to care for any prohibitions or rules at all. They populated the planet with extremely vicious creatures, which were designed to not only tear apart any living thing, but the planet as well. That was also one of the reasons the planet was so fragile. Once the ship got into position, all the soldiers were instructed to get into their launch pods. Besides those from the Midnight Inn, there were countless other teams as well, all of them much bigger than the Midnight Battalion. After all, regardless of how powerful or effective the Midnight Battalion might seem, it was just stupid to send 1,000 soldiers to clear out an entire planet. Each team being sent to this planet, though, was considered elite. Luther couldn't have cared less about that, though. With an impassive face, as if he was bored, he climbed into his pod, after which support technicians came in and ensured he was properly strapped in. Hundreds of thousands of pods were launched all over the planet's surface. The aliens on the planet noticed the rain, and tried shooting the pods out of the sky, but they came equipped with safety measures. Like hail of metal instead of ice, the pods crashed into the ground and spread devastation wherever they landed, despite the fact that the ship had come as close as possible for launch. When the pods opened, the soldiers who were completely safe climbed out. They had only a short while to reorient themselves and get used to the conditions on this planet before the aliens would attack them. But while everyone was gearing up and getting in position to defend, the Midnight Battalion attacked. It could not be helped. Luther, as well as the rest, were born in the clean and pristine environment of the inn, yet now they were exposed to the polluted and stale air of this rogue planet. Although their masks had filtration functions, it was a pale imitation of what they were used to. They were irritated and uncomfortable. Fortunately, there were targets nearby to help them vent their frustrations. All around the pods, where most of the soldiers were waiting to make their first stand, sounds of distant growls and the thumbing and stomping of approaching beasts could be heard. Well, all around them except one direction, where Z was warming up his speakers with a soft and tempered melody titled Enter Sandwoman. Astride Fenrir, Lex was traversing the land with incredible speed. A part of him wanted to believe that if he had been running on his own two legs, he could have still maintained such speed. He couldn't be blamed for thinking like this, as he boasted greater physical strength and resilience than Fenrir. Even given this situation where he could replace the pup's sheer excitement and joy at being allowed to run so fast and freely for so long, with nothing but discipline, the one thing even he had to admit that he couldn't replicate was the tranquility of their journey. The pup boasted great stealth capabilities, Lex always knew that. But after a certain time, Lex realized that Fenrir wasn't actively being stealthy, it was ingrained into his very nature. If Lex had been running at the same speed, massive craters would be left in the ground with each step he took. The roaring wind would herald his arrival wherever he passed, much like the sound of a jet was usually heard even as it had already passed the area by. Yet as Fenrir passed, not only was not a single blade of grass disturbed, there was barely even any sound. Lex watched in wonder as the duo actually passed by a few animals walking in the wild, completely unaware as they passed them by. If Lex didn't know for sure that Fenrir couldn't do that, he might have started to believe that they were invisible. Yet even as they traveled at incredible speeds and never took a break, even hours later they were still far from just their first destination. They were heading towards the capital of the Noel family's territory, from where they would take a teleportation formation and continue on their path. Lex was sure they were heading in the right direction, for they kept consulting the map, but as the map did not denote the distances, there was no way of knowing when they would reach. This journey he was expecting to be tense and fraught with danger, ended up just being a long stretch of uneventful traveling, at least so far. 10 more hours later, when they still had not reached their destination and it was nowhere in sight, Lex gave up. This was too boring. Back at the Emporium, when he heard about that spaceship which could easily travel even between galaxies, Lex had been impressed but did not think he needed such a thing. Now he knew he was wrong. He should look into getting himself a similar ship for long-distance travel as well. The only issue was that transporting such a massive thing to and from the inn was a problem. He would look into finding a ship that can easily fit into his spatial bangle. Until then, he had to fill his time with something else, so he used his remote presence ability to project an image of himself at the inn. It had been a long time since he hosted some guests himself as the innkeeper. It might be interesting if he did that for a while after all this time. Technically, he could use this time productively and actually work, but after so much boredom he did not feel like working. A scan of the inn revealed that all was more or less normal. The absence of some of the most notable faces at the inn had not gone unnoticed, yet he had strictly ordered not to reveal any information to the public. All anyone who asked was told that they had gone somewhere for special training. Besides that, the focus of the guests seemed to be on the event of the week that was going on. Various performers and artists had been invited from multiple planets to have live shows. While Earth was no longer in a position where anyone could focus on such things, some of the refugees participated. Besides that, a lot of participants from the other planets that were linked to the inn came as well. In fact, from X-142 there was actually a musical band consisting of all fairies. The tiny stars were unusually popular, though Lex had to admit their music was quite catchy. As Lex was observing the event, and all the guests, his sight eventually focused on two teenagers. A short yet plump boy was accompanied by a taller yet skinnier girl. The faint resemblance in their appearance hinted that they were related. They were dressed oddly, with clothes that looked like they had been worn in sections. For example, the shirt or whatever was covering their torso actually consisted of 7 small bits of fabric which had to be worn one at a time. The same kind of clothing was also on their arms and legs. Yet strange as it was, they were not showing much skin, and by the way that the two held themselves up, Lex got the feeling that they were dressed formally rather than casually, at least according to their own standards. N0VLSP.C0M. There's too much of a crowd here, the girl complained as she looked at the crowded main street. Whoever sold us the keys lied to us. How is this a relaxing spot for a vacation? Chapter 652 Work. The sun hung low in the evening sky, painting the inn in a warm hue. There were a few scattered clouds here and there, but instead of making the inn seem dull and gray, they made the inn seem light and airy. Fresh snow would fall wherever the clouds traveled, though somehow the roads and walking paths stayed miraculously clean. Of course, if anyone tread off the fixed path, their footsteps would be accompanied by the satisfying crunch of stepping in the powdery snow. As if to match the mood set by the environment, the usual energetic buzz of the crowd of Main Street had changed to hushed murmurs. Though most of the guests did not really need to do so, they were dressed in warm coats and comfy scarves, and carried cups of hot cocoa or coffee or tea wherever they went. Some guests even walked around with large wooden mugs of warm mead, while others munched on fresh, steaming chicken patties, veggie rolls, or dough balls. Though there was no music playing, the ambience of Main Street itself resulted in a soft melody that made one seem both cold and warm at the same time. Yet amidst this coziness, the two teenagers seemed malcontent. While for some, the simple or mundane things such as enjoying an ordinary snow day was quite pleasing, for the energetic and rebellious teenagers it was not enough. They were young and spirited, and were not yet at the stage of life where such subtle things could trigger nostalgia or melancholy. Or, if one were to simply take it at the words of the girl, they simply wanted a place where they could enjoy solitude. The crowds and hustle and bustle of a busy street left them tense and agitated, unable to relax. "Excuse me, dear guests. I don't mean to intrude, but I could not help but overhearing that you are unsatisfied with this place," said Lex, as he teleported his projection behind the two. The kids, much to their credit, were not at all startled by Lex suddenly appearing behind them. Moreover, when they looked at him, there was no significant emotion in their eyes, as if everything they saw or experienced was mundane. "My sister and I came here to get away for a while," the boy explained. A traveling merchant sold the key to us and told us that the key would take us somewhere relaxing, where we could have a vacation while our parents worked. But this, ugh. The boy seemed too disgusted to finish his sentence. Although Lex did not show it, he was subtly taken aback by the children's reaction. If nothing else, almost everyone who visited the inn would at least enjoy the purity of the spiritual energy. Just that in itself was clearly enough to put everyone in a good mood. Lex was no longer as ignorant as before. By reading a lot of general knowledge available of the Henali portal as well as from documents provided by the Emporium, he knew a lot more about star ranks. It was not a term used only by the inn, and in fact was a generic unit used across the entire Origin realm. The star rank denoted the energy concentration in any given area. When the unit was first created, it was called star rank because usually in a star system, it was the level of the local star which would affect the quantity and quality of energy in its surrounding planet. But the fact that rogue planets, minor realms, random asteroid belts, and even seemingly empty patches of the realm had varying levels of energy, it was then simply used to denote the energy level of a given area. In fact, Lex had even learned about the various kinds and qualities of spiritual energies that existed in the universe, and why different energies resulted in different star ranks. The simple version of it was that a higher energy level may not always be better, and a lower energy level may not be a bad thing. The good and bad aspects of energy levels all depended on one's cultivation level. Fortunately, that was not a concern at the Midnight Inn, for even if the energy level was too high for certain guests, the inn would automatically ensure that it would not interact with them, and instead the inn would surround those guests with the optimal energy levels for them. Long story short, almost everyone who came to the inn enjoyed the pleasant sensation provided by a purer and cleaner environment. After all, the average star rank across the realm was 1 star. Yet the kids did not seem to care at all. It was as if this was ordinary, or even the most basic requirement which they did not even need to think about. I understand that the crowded atmosphere of Main Street does not suit your tastes. How about we go elsewhere and discuss how you can best enjoy the inn? Lex snapped his fingers, and teleported the three to a cabin atop the Midnight Mountain. There was a small clearing where the view from one side was the bustling village, while on another side stood the magnificent mountain man, in his seemingly endless slumber. The murmurs of the street had disappeared, giving way to the sound of the wind, traveling over the snow-covered trees. There was a sharp contrast to the busy street, yet somehow Lex knew that even this would not satisfy the children. If it were so easy, they would not have remained unimpressed even at the main street. That is why, to begin with, he only said they were coming here to discuss what they can do. And indeed, the children remained non-reactive after teleporting here. They looked around at their new environment, as if to inspect it, yet not much else. Lex could not help but want to learn more about them, so he scanned them. Name, Kuno Akiko. Age, 13. Sex, male. Cultivation details, Chi training peak. Species, human. Midnight and prestige level, 1. Bloodline, lycanthrope. Remarks, please refrain from teleporting away random children, this is not that kind of system. Name, Kava Akiko. Age, 16. Sex, Malin 0 vel USB.C0M. Cultivation details, Foundation realm peak. Species, human. Midnight and prestige level, 1. Bloodline, lycanthrope. Remarks, please be warned, another instance of teleporting minors will result in a complaint to the intergalactic police. The fact that Kuno was already a cultivator even before turning 15 said a lot about his background. Humans would need special kinds of medicinal fruits and herbs which would prepare their bodies to cultivate ahead of time. Of course, there was also a chance that their bloodline had something to do with their ability to cultivate. Better, said Kuno, but there doesn't seem like there's much to do here. I concur, Kava chimed in. Just because we are on vacation it does not mean we can lay around sleeping and doing nothing. What actual, productive and fruitful work is there for us to do here? Just because we want a break from the stress of day-to-day life does not mean we can afford to just lounge around. Lex was intrigued by the challenge these kids were presenting. He could naturally tell that they were not being petulant, and instead genuinely could not comprehend not doing some work. Perhaps for them not dealing with whatever they had to endure on a daily basis was already a vacation, so they did not need other events to excite or stimulate them. Instead, they want something productive to do to occupy their minds, while still giving them the feeling of having used their time productively. Truthfully, Lex could not understand people who had such views about relaxing, but it was true that people who were too used to being productive could not stand wasting time. The midnight inn had to cater to all kinds of guests, not just the convenient ones, so Lex genuinely took this up as a challenge. "Why don't you tell me a little about what you imagine your vacation being like? That way, I can recommend some of the inn's activities or services for you to enjoy." Kuno shrugged and said, "I don't know. I've never had a vacation." "What about you?" "Me neither," said Kava. Lex smiled warily. Since they had no experience, having them enjoy their vacation was both easy and difficult. The only real thing that would determine which of those two it would end up being was Lex's marketing skills. "I have the perfect idea. Why don't you two give it a try? If you don't like it, you can always stop." The two looked at each other and shrugged, coming to some kind of agreement. Excellent. He teleported them over to a new district of the greenhouse, and passed a few instructions to the turtle. "I'm sending you over a couple of new volunteers. Have them work the newly created cold desert, and ensure they finish planting all the new vegetables. Remember, we have only 6 months to prepare the best produce for the upcoming wedding, so we have to plant the best possible stuff." Chapter 6, 53-300. Kuno and Kava were teleported once again, this time finding themselves in a cold and barren land. Due to the fact that they were cultivators, the chill didn't negatively affect them, but it was a lot more biting here than even the snowy mountain they were on before. Every breath they took in felt biting cold, yet to them it was just reinvigorating rather than uncomfortable. Every breath they exhaled left a long, thick trail of mist. Yet somehow, besides their misty breath, and the chill running down their spines, there was no other sign of the pervading cold in the surrounding area. There was no snow or ice anywhere to be found. The only sight for them to see was the dried yet grainy soil, and the gray and beige pebbles and rocks littered throughout the area. There wasn't even any vegetation. If they did not know better, they would assume that they had been sent to some kind of wasteland or deserted area. Yet as deplorable as the conditions seemed, the children actually seemed to like it a little. Their bloodlines inevitably affected their behavior and thought process, even if it was indirectly. What this actually meant was that they felt nice and cozy in cold climates, and would be more irritable in warm climates due to the fact that their bodies innately stayed warm. Now it wasn't their bloodline forcing them to behave irritably in the heat and relaxed in the cold, yet due to the physical feedback of their bodies, they naturally developed such behavior. This was only one of the simpler and easily identified idiosyncrasies that their family shared. Another one was their usually serious attitude, not to mention their extreme focus on any task or objective. Sure, there were some oddballs in their family here and there, but that was not the norm. As such, these two who were out on vacation did not really know how to enjoy or behave, and could only think to keep themselves busy somehow. Yet what could there possibly be for them to do in this frozen wasteland? As if to answer their question, a dark figure appeared in the distance, approaching them. Its movements seemed to be slow, yet the actual speed at which it arrived was surprisingly fast. Moreover, even from a distance, the figure was radiating a dominating and commanding aura, one that their bloodline was reacting to. That genuinely surprised them, for they had never encountered such a situation. Normally, even if they faced a much stronger creature, their bloodline would only make them more aggressive and ready to put up a fight. This was confirmed by their mother, who had once been in the presence of a dragon, though fortunately for them she did not have to fight it, yet now, their bloodline was cowering. How was this possible? Before the kids could fully wrap their heads around the submission emanating from within their very bones, the figure arrived. It belonged to a turtle, or at least something that resembled a turtle. Its body was massive, causing them to have to crane their neck up to look at its face. A single, curved, gray horn protruded from its forehead, though streaks of purple had begun appearing on it. "Oh dear, more silly humans," the turtle lamented, though it did not seem too disturbed. Its eternal fondness for picking up strays gave it a very tolerant and mellow personality. And yes, to it, humans were just more strays or pets for it to collect and raise. After all, hadn't it also rescued and protected Lex when he first came to Nibiru? To it, Lex was and still is no different from Little Blue and the rest. The children, who were finally showing some expression, looked up in awe and reverence. Lex, who was spying on this situation from the Midnight Mountain, did not know if he should feel satisfied that he finally broke through and impressed them, or offended that the turtle had elicited such a reaction but not himself. "I have been told that you little humans want to farm. I will bring you some saplings and teach you how to plant them in this environment." "What are we planting?" Kava asked, curious. "And what for?" Kuno asked as well, trying to put up a strong front. He could not accept that his own blood was being submissive before another, and did not want to give in. "In 6 months there will be a wedding," the turtle told. "But more importantly, the wedding will also be a conference for immortals. The food that you will plant now will be served at that conference." "We're growing food for immortals?" the duo asked, startled. "No, silly humans. This is food for others at the conference. The food for the immortals is being grown by me personally." After that, the turtle did not bother explaining any further, and used a vine made of grass to pull out a small cactus from within its shell. But the strange thing was that this cactus seemed to be made of rocks, and the only parts of it which seemed like an ordinary plant were its roots. The turtle showed the kids how to plant it in the ground, which seemed quite straightforward when the turtle did it. This unusual cactus required that its roots be buried to a minimum depth, and had to be planted in an area with lots of pebbles and rocks. The process seemed straightforward enough, and growing food for a conference of immortals seemed a worthy enough task for them to put some effort into it. After all, regardless of their background, as mere mortals themselves, they still needed to respect immortals. But when they tried to repeat the process themselves, using tools the turtle had given them, they discovered that the seemingly loose and grainy soil was as tough as metal. They literally could not even scratch the surface. The kids looked at each other dumbfounded, while the turtle only watched silently from the side. Problem solving was an important skill for its pets to learn, so it would not interfere unless they were completely overwhelmed. N0vlisp.c0m. Feeling unresigned, the two tried again, this time using more strength. When they failed again, they tried once more while using spiritual techniques to literally attack the floor. Kuno was still not able to produce any significant results, while Kava managed to produce a visible indent in the ground. The repeated failures did not demotivate them, and instead spurred them to put even more effort into their task. The duo activated their bloodlines, which only produced limited visual changes in the two. Both of them suddenly grew more hair on their bodies, though it was not to the extent that it completely covered their skin, and their eyes turned yellow. This time, instead of trying separately, they both began hacking at the same point in the ground, working together to produce a single hole. The process was slow, incredibly slow. But at least it had begun. The turtle shook its head and went away. From what it could see, the kids were more or less playing around in the dirt. Far away, Lex snickered as he saw the two working relentlessly to provide him with free labor. That's what they got for acting haughty in front of him. No, wait. He meant the inn was capable of satisfying the request of any kind of guest. Feeling somewhat entertained, he decided to continue hosting guests for a while, so for the next few hours, random guests who found themselves in slightly less crowded areas were visited by the innkeeper, unbeknownst to them. Since he never officially introduced himself, everyone just assumed he was just another worker at the inn. Eventually, his fun was interrupted by a system notification, one that he had been waiting for. The workers that he hired for the inn now included 2 races, humans and draconian apostles. From those 2 races, the humans now had the option of 3 different bloodlines. The first bloodline, Regalia Bloom, was considered the default bloodline any of his workers could unlock and did not cost any extra. The second bloodline, Anachronistic Ignition, which was the one Luther had, cost 350 million MP per worker to give to a new worker, which was quite a bit more than Regalia Bloom. The third bloodline, Death Counter, also had a massive price bump, coming out at 300 million MP per worker. But considering the fact that both the newly unlocked bloodlines were extremely impressive, Lex continued to randomly give them out regardless of the massive cost. Yet once he received a summons to war, he had the idea of hiring a group of workers specifically for combat purposes. It was then that he discovered that besides their massive cost, the newer bloodlines also could not be given out en masse, and it required quite a bit of time to summon workers with these bloodlines if all of them had the newer ones. Still, Lex was not miserly. He immediately spent 90 billion MP and maxed out his limit to hire 300 workers with the Death Counter bloodline. Once they were trained, they would be his new Midnight Battalion. Chapter 654, Choose to Fight. From the time Lex chose to hire the 300 new workers to the time they arrived at the inn, quite a few days had passed. It had long since become Lex's habit to deeply analyze everything the system did, and compare it to its previous actions to determine patterns. He never had problems ordering a large number of workers before, and the delivery was usually almost instant. So then what exactly had caused the delay? He could come up with a few different answers. The first and most obvious answer was, naturally, the bloodline. Death Counter was one of the new bloodlines he unlocked for his employees, and it essentially made the user immortal, more or less. While it was not nearly as versatile as Regalia Bloom or Anachronistic Ignition, it had one simple use case. The owner of the bloodline could hide a single drop of blood anywhere, and if they were to die, they could use that single drop to come back to life at full health and maximum power. Of course, the actual application of the bloodline ability was slightly more complex than how it was stated, but that was essentially the gist of the bloodline ability. The bloodline could do nothing else, but honestly, wasn't that already enough? When compared to the fact that normal employees did not come with the bloodline unlocked, but only the ability to potentially unlock the Regalia Bloom, the difference could be easily identified. But while the bloodline was the most obvious reason for why there was a delay, it was not the only one. When hiring new staff, the system allowed Lex to input what kind of role he expected to put them in, after which the system would make them more skilled in related fields. That was not to say that the system could directly control their talents, but that it would give each worker a higher starting point in related fields, making it easier for them to start and master their expected roles. Normally, Lex would put in a general direction, but would not be too specific so as to allow each worker to develop naturally. Only when he was entering the details for Luther did Lex end up being extremely specific. Well, this time he had also been very particular in the skills and talents of the new workers. As a result, he may have overdone it a little. He made each worker extremely gifted physically. He made them all quick learners, with an incredibly quick training time when learning combat. Moreover, he made them all incredibly focused, driven, disciplined, and hardworking. This was not to mention that he gave them a solid foundation in biology, physics, chemistry, mathematics, statistics and probability, data analysis, pattern recognition, critical thinking and, well, much, much more. From the very moment they were hired, they knew how to fight, and they knew how to heal. They could construct fortifications, and had the foundation to quickly learn formations to help in offense and defense as well. They could perfectly strategize on how best to assault enemies and enemy strongholds. In summary, they were pretty cool. But the price of all that coolness might have been their delayed arrival. Whether the reason for the delay was one of those, neither, or even both, did not really matter. It was enough that Lex took note of the delay for now. In the short while he did not intend on hiring more, for even though he knew it was an important expense, it was also important to take stock of everything as he went along. He could not go around randomly spending 90 billion MP regardless of how much he was earning, or he would quickly end up broke. So it was best to instead focus on training these new workers. Once, long ago, when Lex had started hiring workers from the system, and had no access to the portal or other organizations, he was forced to rely on the system to get cultivation techniques and spiritual techniques for them from the system. As convenient as it seemed, it was actually not the best solution. That was because this was only a perfunctory service offered by the system. Once his Midnight Battalion panel started working, he assumed he would be able to get more optimal techniques from there, but for now, the Midnight Library would have to do .n0vlusb.c0m. Of course, even so, he would not allow them to randomly select techniques from there. As his future frontline force, they had to have the best of the best, while being as lethal as possible. As such, he had Chad, the deputy head of security, work in close coordination with the planning division and come up with a training plan for them. That naturally included what techniques they would train in. Of course, their own personal preferences would have to be taken into account, but since they were meant to be a battalion, their joint strength mattered a lot more than their individual strength. "Welcome to the Midnight Inn," he said, solemnly. Normally, for new initiates of the inn, the onboarding process is different. But for you all, it is completely different, as the expectations from you are completely different. You have all been chosen as warriors and soldiers, to be the front line of the midnight and against the dangers and threats of the universe. But at the same time, I do not believe in forcing anyone. Ahead of you lies extreme danger, and a difficult and uneasy path. As such, if any of you wish to opt out, now is your chance. Think clearly, for you will not get such a chance again. I will not hold it against any of you if you do not wish to follow this path, and will give you another role at the inn. But, this is your only opportunity, so choose wisely. I will give you all some time to think it over before you have to give me your answer. In the meantime, go explore the inn. Get a deeper understanding of what it is you will be fighting for, if you choose to fight, that is. Occasionally missing content, please report errors in time. Chapter 655, Don't Have a Credit Card. Although Lex had expressly hired these workers for the purpose of fighting, and they had a bloodline that was for the express purpose of coming back to life, he did not want to force anyone. Even though he said he wouldn't be giving them another chance later on to quit, if one of them really wanted to, Lex would figure something out. Besides, he had seen enough of the universe to know that anything was possible. Even if they had a bloodline that could revive them, who was to say there wasn't another bloodline out there that could perfectly counter this ability? Since bloodlines were based on laws, what if they encountered an enemy who had a better mastery of the laws that this particular bloodline was based on? Couldn't they theoretically counter, or even control their bloodline? Lex didn't have the answer to such questions, but he knew that it was best to give them as much choice in this matter as possible. He stood there and watched as all of his workers dispersed, but was surprised to find that one of the workers still stood there. His arms were folded behind his back, and his head pointed directly forward. His body was still tense, his shoulders locked, chest held out high, as if he was standing at attention. But for all his posturing, his short height and young appearance took away a lot from the intimidating aura he was trying to portray. He looked like another Z. "Don't you want to go look around?" Lex asked him. "No, sir," he replied forcefully. "I know what I want, and that is to fight." Lex gave the boy's enthusiasm a nod and asked, "What's your name?" "Leonidas," the boy replied, his voice still loud and forceful. "Well then, Leonidas, if you're sure of what you want, go find Deputy Head Chad and introduce yourself. You'll be spending a lot of time together in the future." Leonidas saluted Lex, and then marched off stiffly. It was clear that the boy did not know how to actually march, but that would probably change soon. Lex watched the enthusiastic boy for a while, before his projection disappeared. Back at the Crystal Realm, his main body had finally reached his destination. Now he had to figure out the right teleportation formation, and get about using it. A large, chameleon-like reptile made its way through a busy street. On this planet ruled by insectoids, it was not exactly welcome, but the locals did not do much else but give him dirty looks. After all, he already had a reputation here, so they knew not to mess with the reptilian dance king. Chuckling to himself as he thought of his fond memories on this planet, and how his dance moves had brought its leaders to their knees, he kept moving through the crowds until he finally reached his destination, the Infinity Emporium. The chat room he was a part of was quite massive, and was quite helpful at times. In fact, it had separate subchannels for some of the realms. The Origin realm, as it happened, was one of the realms which had its own subchannel. Within it, some of the more experienced users shared some helpful tips and tricks. The Emporium happened to be highly endorsed on the channel. Although the Emporium had not spread to other realms yet, it was quite widespread within the Origin realm, and so having a good relationship with them was quite helpful. The Dance King made his way in, only to find a familiar face waiting for him at the counter. "Powell, my good friend, how are you?" the Dance King asked. "Superb, now that you're here," replied Powell, smiling back at him. Powell was, of course, also a chameleon, or so it appeared. It was common knowledge shared within the chat that the race of the shopkeeper one would run into would always be identical to the person walking in. Also, every one of them was named Powell. How or why such a thing happened had remained unexplained, but almost every person in the Origin realm had used their system detector in the Emporium, only to come up with a failed report. That either meant that Powell was not a system user, or his system was so advanced and powerful that their machines were not capable of detecting them, in which case it was better for them to not try and antagonize Powell to begin with. "It's a good thing you're in a good mood, for I need help in an unusual matter. I need any information you have on a place called the Midnight Inn. At the same time, if you happen to have one of their golden keys, I'll take that off your hands as well." "Hold a moment," said Powell before he quickly began perusing on his tablet. But his search did not take as long as expected, and his uncomfortable facial expression also told the Dance King it was bad news. "What is it?" he asked, suppressing his growing concern. "There's a strict ban on all Emporium employees. We cater to no business requests related to the Midnight Inn." The king was startled by this answer, for he had never heard of such a thing. N0valusb.c0m. "Officially, I can't help you," said Powell as he whispered, reaching close to him. "But unofficially, I can't help it if you overhear me say that a lot of the golden keys you mentioned have been spotted in and around the Pendau galaxy." That's over 100,000 galaxies away," said the Dance King, startled. It seemed like he had accepted a difficult quest. Or maybe not. "Okay, forget the inn. I need a ticket for the wormhole ferry." "Oh, that'll cost you. With the Henali Champions tourney coming up, all intergalactic travel has really jumped up in price." The Dance Kind did not hesitate in throwing a brown bag full of crystal coins onto the table. Since not everyone had a credit card, they had to make do with coin bags. Chapter 656, Tell Me More. The capital of the Noel family's territory was extremely large, but that came as no surprise. A sprawling city covered both sides of a river 50 feet, 15.2 meters, wide. White floor walls covered the length of the river crossing the city, setting the theme for the city's color scheme. Oddly enough, there were almost no high-rises in the entire city, with the only exception being a large, spiraling tower in the heart of the city that Lex suspected could double as a lighthouse. The top of the tower also looked suspiciously similar to a bird stand. He could not imagine that the Noel family had built a spot for soul birds to rest right within their capital. But then again, why couldn't they? Lex did not speculate further on the topic, and instead focused on figuring out how to reach the teleportation formation. There was no boundary wall to the city, so entering was no problem. The real problem was navigating the maze-like streets to find his destination. Although there were no high-rises in the city, each building was 3 stories high and built closely together, making it so that while walking in the streets, the rest of the city could not really be seen. It wasn't as if Lex did not ask directions, but there were just too many streets. It was difficult to cover any real distance in a short period of time. More than once Lex had to convince Fenrir not to jump on top of the buildings and just bypass all the traffic on the ground, though he himself began to wonder why he was stopping the trusty wolf. Eventually, though, the conclusion that Lex came to about why they were having such a tough time finding their destination was that both he and Fenrir were unreasonably hungry. The two decided to take a break, and once Fenrir shrunk his size down, they found their way to a tavern called Hippo House Tavern. The owner was a hairy man with a large belly and a laugh that shook the foundations of the entire building. He was sitting behind the counter, greeting each and every guest as they walked in, recognizing almost every patron. Lex greeted the man with matching enthusiasm, and struck up a conversation with him about the city, though Lex did not talk about anything in particular and seemed to be interested in anything and everything. The owner was even more enthusiastic about conversing with Lex once he saw the amount of food that he ordered. For cultivators, it was not unusual to eat a lot of food, so Lex's order was not surprising. But even so, the amount of food Lex ordered was genuinely surprising, and for the owner, pleasing. While Lex was eating and chatting, he naturally also brushed on the topic of the teleportation formation. That was when, for the first time, he understood the complexities involved in long-distance teleportation. According to the map he had been provided, his next destination was a place called Delurian Drip Bog. It was pretty simple to say that he just needed to take the teleportation formation and select that as his destination, but apparently this was one of the furthest places the formation teleported to. In a straight line, it was approximately 31,000 miles, 49,889 kilometers, away, which, if Lex remembered correctly, was greater than the circumference of the Earth. But he was already used to teleporting anywhere he wanted using the inn, not to mention the teleportation he experienced to travel from one planet to another back in the origin realm. That alone was no doubt countless light-years of distance covered during one teleportation. As a result, he had become desensitized to the complexities of the act. But conversing with the tavern owner brought him back to reality. Under ordinary circumstances, the teleportation formation would only be active one day a week, and each individual spot cost tens of thousands of spirit stones. Lex naturally had such an amount. He had long since begun to gather as many physical forms of currency and valuables, which naturally included spirit coins, spirit stones, spirit liquid, gold, jewels, a few other valuable metals that were not found on Earth and some other random spirit-based currencies. He had received these mostly from the Emporium, though some small exchanges he had set up in the guild room also contributed. Since he was going to be traveling, he naturally stocked up his spatial bangle with everything he could possibly need. That was not the issue. The issue was, this was so damn expensive for an ordinary person. He remembered back when he was at the academy and went out on the expedition, a massive group was traveling with them. He could not even imagine the cost of transporting so many people. It seemed that, despite his efforts to gather as much general knowledge as possible, he had gaps in his knowledge. When he asked why it was so expensive, the tavern owner merely shrugged and commented that he'd heard some of the resources used in building the formation were extremely rare and expensive, and would often get used up. As for what they were, only actual formation experts would know. Lex made a mental note to hire some formation experts for the inn. There was no profession that the inn should lack knowledge of, and as the innkeeper, he needed to have an in-depth understanding of all such matters. Lex also realized one more very important thing. In fact, it could be said to be crucially important to the development of the inn. He did not want to admit it, but the food this random tavern gave was actually somewhat better than the food served at the inn. As of late, the inn had started having better and better ingredients due to the turtles' efforts and the expanded farmlands, but that was not enough. At most it provided him with vegetables and fruits, but he lacked any kind of meat to go along with it. Moreover, even if he had incredible ingredients, the cooks he had were good, but not skilled enough to be mind-blowing. If only he could put up a recruitment notice for someone with a cooking system, how great would that be? With such thoughts in his mind, Lex finally finished the meal. After thanking the tavern owner for keeping him company, a satisfied Lex and Fenrir left. Although he had found out that the teleportation formation would only work once a week, he had no intention of waiting that long. The token given to him by Jolene should be enough to have them start the formation for him early, right? Besides, he had a good relationship with the Noel family. He was sure, if nothing else, they could figure out some deal. New York, Earth. Raphael walked through the long, extravagant hallways of his father's latest mansion with an extremely serious expression. The war on Earth had been going on miserably, but they were alive. However, if his suspicions were right, that might soon change. When he finally reached his father's room, he did not bother knocking and just barged in. King Marlowe could be seen casually reclining on a chair, his butler standing beside him, giving some kind of report. He wore no shirt, yet his chest was covered in bandages to help him heal from his many wounds. "Old man, we have trouble," Raphael said, not bothering with semantics right now. He was having great trouble as it was, surviving in this new reality of his. It was nothing like the future he knew, and if it weren't for his skills and insights from all the battles he recalled from the future, he would not have survived. Almost every opportunity he could possibly gain on Earth was already probably gone, and Lord only knew if the threats and dangers he recalled from the future would even come now or not. Or, if they came, what would happen? "What is it?" Marlowe asked, taking his son quite seriously. Although he was not exactly satisfied with Raphael's personal strength, the kid had spent countless years in a coma. He could not be blamed. Besides, his leadership in battle and his unmatched foresight and skill made him worthy of recognition in his own right. No longer was he called Marlowe's son when people talked of him. He was Raphael, the greatest living human general on Earth right now. If my guess is correct, we're going to face an attack soon. One we can't possibly survive. Oh? What makes you say that? We have many allies, I doubt they'd let us suffer such an attack unaided. That's where you're wrong, Raphael said, shaking his head. I've been monitoring troop movements for a while now. Based on the trends I've seen, and the hints I've collected, I suspect that the deities and AI have reached a tacit agreement about us. Since we don't support the deities preaching in New York, we are nothing but an eyesore to them. If they can get rid of us, there will be one less competitor for Earth. Instead of being alarmed, Marlowe smiled. Chapter 657 Hidden Intentions. Right now, on Earth, there are 4 forces competing against one another. The first is naturally the AI who have invaded with the intention of killing everyone. The second are the deities who have agreed to aid the humans in fighting them off. On the surface it seems like they want to help the humans, but more and more I feel like they have ulterior motives. After all, there is nothing of value on Earth that they want to protect, and I find it hard to believe they are doing this out of the goodness of their hearts. The issue with the third party, the devils supporting the remnants of the ruling families, is the same. The only thing is that I cannot guess what they are after right now. That finally leaves the fourth party, which is us, the unaffiliated humans. While theoretically we should be allies with the deities and devils against the AI, I suspect something sinister is afoot. Based on reports from our scouts, all the allied forces near us have been slowly yet seemingly inadvertently moving away. I think that they have tacitly consented to our demise, so that there is one less player for them to compete with. Alright, so where do you think the decisive attack will come from? Marlowe asked, seemingly still unperturbed. In fact, even the butler did not seem to show any emotions, besides annoyance and exhaustion. N0 vel USB.C0M. The point of the attack is to take us by surprise and give us no time to prepare so that they can decimate us. I suspect they will send in soldiers directly from orbit, landing behind our defensive lines, or come from the water where our visuals are blocked. Most likely, considering that in the past we have shown effective battle effectiveness in 2 separate groups, you being one group and me with the army being another, they will attack from 3 directions simultaneously. Marlowe nodded, and said, "Not bad. Your analysis is getting better and better each day." Is this really the time to be focused on such a thing? Raphael asked, feeling emotionally exhausted. I think any time is a good opportunity for a father to compliment his son, Marlowe said, chuckling to himself. Raphael couldn't reply. So instead, he just waited for the king to bestow him with a proper answer. You forget, my son, the thing I excel in most is self-defense, Marlowe finally said, seeing as how Raphael was not in the mood to humor him. Let me show you a little something I've been working on. Marlowe merely extended his hand forward and used a certain technique. Raphael's pupils shrunk as he stared at his father's hand in horror and surprise. His stupid father was a maniac. Lex made his way to the Noel family mansion, which was a lot easier to find than the teleportation formations. After all, the mansion itself seemed to be a tourist attraction of sorts. Apparently, once a month, during a special event, tourists were even allowed to enter certain portions of it. He expected that the process to gain admittance would be difficult or complex, and he was ready to flaunt the token given to him by the Phillips family if necessary, yet his experience was quite unexpected. The moment he approached the gate, the guards seemed to recognize him and all suddenly stood at attention. The gates were opened even before he arrived, and an escort astride some kind of beast suddenly appeared, to guide Lex deeper inside. At first he wanted to ask how or why they recognized him, but upon noticing the reverence on the soldiers' faces as they watched him pass, he felt too awkward to do so. Lex was led all the way to the front door, where a tall, well-dressed man seemed to be waiting for him. "Mr. Lex, it is a pleasure to finally meet you," the man said as he gave a deep bow, before approaching Lex to shake his hand. Lex did not hesitate to grab the man's hand and give him a firm handshake, a pleasant smile on his face. Yet behind his perfectly pleasant appearance, Lex had raised his guard to the maximum. It was not just his instincts that warned him, but that he himself could judge that there was something off about this overly enthusiastic fellow. "The pleasure is mine. I have never had such a warm welcome somewhere before." "Then you should come here more often. Had I known you were coming, I would have prepared an even grander welcome." The man laughed as he welcomed Lex inside the mansion, as if he was extremely pleased with himself. "Please, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Marcus, I am Lord Joseph Noel's nephew. I look after the mansion and the city while Uncle is not here. You may be somewhat surprised at your reception, but Uncle sent your information to all the cities in his territory. You'll find that you will receive the best possible treatment anywhere you are recognized." "That. I was not expecting such a thing," said Lex, genuinely surprised. "Indeed. Uncle has not given any other information, except to treat you with the utmost respect. Although it's short notice, as soon as the guards informed me of your arrival, I passed orders for a banquet in your honor. All the dignitaries from across the city will be invited." That sounds wonderful," said Lex, successfully hiding the deep reluctance he felt upon hearing the news. "But unfortunately, I have important business that is very time-sensitive. Since you have already recognized me, and since Joseph has been kind enough to pass such instructions, things should be much simpler. I need to use the teleportation formation to Delurian Drip Bog. I can naturally cover the cost of having the formation activated ahead of time." "Nonsense. If I make you pay, then Uncle will disown me." "How urgent is your task?" "I can have the formation readied within the hour. As soon as possible would be much appreciated. It's not that I don't wish to receive your hospitality, but I really cannot wait." "Well then, please wait a moment while I go and get things ready." Marcus left Lex in a lavish sitting room while he left to make preparations. Lex did not drop his guard even when he was left alone, nor did he let anything show in his expressions. That was because, after spending some more time with Marcus, Lex had clearly noticed a deep hostility buried in the man's heart. Of course, he had done his best to hide it, but with Lex's vast experience dealing with people, his sixth sense, his instincts, not to mention his extremely astute pup companion, he could hide nothing from Lex. Of course, Lex did not care why Marcus felt that hostility, or what his story was. As long as he did not interfere with Lex's task in any way, he would be happy enough to leave things be. His wait was short and uneventful, as Marcus soon returned, taking long and purposeful strides. "The formation is being prepared. Why don't we take a carriage to the terminal? It should be completely ready by the time we arrive." "Excellent." Marcus led Lex back to the front of the mansion where a carriage was already waiting for them, and accompanied him as they departed. The entire time, Marcus wore a massive grin, as if he was extremely pleased and enthusiastic to meet Lex. Any normal person would completely be fooled by the act. Even if they suspected something, they would only suspect that the cause of Marcus' enthusiasm was a desire to please his uncle. "What's that tower for?" Lex asked when the conversation allowed, pointing to the massive structure in the middle of the city. "That's the local soul bird shrine. Although we, the Noel family, are not able to tame soul birds in the way the Hum Nation does, it is not a problem to establish a relationship. We have a flock of over 20 soul birds who consider this territory as their home, and visit the shrine every month to be worshipped by the locals. I'm not sure why they like it so much, but this is quite a common custom in all remote territories." Lex did not comment as various thoughts ran through Lex's mind. He was reminded of the deities, and wondered if the soul birds counted as such. Why else would they give so much importance to being worshipped? There was a very easy way to find out the answer. The turtle had adopted a soul bird back at the inn. All he needed to do was scan it to learn more. And if that didn't work, he could ask the turtle. He could also. Suddenly Lex froze, as a thought occurred to him. He pretended to rub his eyes while he secretly put on the fancy contact lenses. It was time to see if these things were any good. Chapter 658 Trapped. The first time Lex used the fancy monocle, the amount of details it provided were overwhelming. It analyzed the material of each and every item it saw, and started randomly measuring things in detail he found difficult to even imagine ever needing. To be able to keep it at a level where Lex could actually use it, he had to disable many features and keep it limited in what information it provided him. As a result, in the early days, it had even saved his life by detecting the arrival of zombies before he himself was able to see them. Now, honestly, Lex barely felt the need to use them. Not only were his instincts incredibly strong, but his own observation alongside the use of his spirit sense made it so that he felt like the fancy contact lenses probably could not keep up with him. That is one of the reasons he hadn't really bothered using them. Another was that, although he kept his left eye's ability turned off, it could also see a lot of details that he still found hard to completely comprehend. So how could the lenses possibly keep up? But right now, he tried them anyway. Especially because he had also picked up a special spiritual technique that he could use in conjunction with the lenses. He assumed that they might become helpful with that extra push. He quickly realized just how much he had been underestimating the lenses. Due to his increased cultivation, his brain could now process the massive amounts of data the lenses were providing him with, all without actually distracting him from functioning normally. Moreover, the fancy monocle relied on Lex to fill its database, so the information was a lot more detailed, and revealed information that Lex didn't even know how to comprehend. For example, when he put on the contacts, he looked around the carriage and learned that the Gangelian atmospheric density within the carriage was 7. What did that even mean? But aside from the data he could make no sense of, there was plenty of information that he could comprehend. The carriage was made from a kind of material called sublime composite, which was artificially created using various extremely valuable materials which had excellent energy insulating capabilities. He also learnt that exactly 3.4 tons of sublime composite was used in the construction of the carriage, and that there were a series of other valuable materials fixed at various edges of the carriage, making it aesthetically pleasing. Yet, underneath all that was a carefully planned formation which used the sublime composite as a foundation and other items as supporting materials. The lenses were able to recognize the existence of the formation due to key principles which were being applied, though it could not determine the specific formation being used. Based on his own instincts, he knew that the carriage was no threat to him, but he had been completely ignorant of the fact that the carriage itself was a moving formation. N0vlisp.c0m. As such, this served as a learning experience for him. Moreover, due to his increased mental capabilities, encountering these items and gaining an in-depth explanation about how they were being used was enough for him to learn about them for good. In the future, if he ever encountered a similar situation, he would be able to identify them on his own. Moreover, they were serving as inspiration for things to do at the inn. He turned to look at Marcus, who was still smiling and talking, and was intrigued by the information the lenses were able to gather. The first thing the lenses informed him of was that they could only gather surface-level information from him because he seemed to be employing a protective technique that protected him from probing. Yet it could still identify his height, weight, skin temperature, and much more. The thing he found most intriguing was that by studying the subtle tightness and relaxed state of the muscles all over his body, the lens could reasonably guess what kind of emotions Marcus was actually feeling. Of course, this was again not a detailed review, for a more thorough scan was blocked. That was the point at which Lex used the accompanying technique for the fancy contact lenses, and things reached a whole new level. The contact lenses, instead of providing him with the final conclusion of its analysis, began giving him raw data on what it was seeing. That's when the technique took over. The world itself became more vibrant, as if Lex was suddenly able to see new colors. Moreover, he could see those colors to absorb new information from them. For example, the hidden hostility that Lex had detected from Marcus was now as apparent as day, and seemed to paint the entire man in shades of green and red. Feelings of inferiority, jealousy, envy, hatred, and a tinge of admiration made up the foundation of his hostility. But that was not all. Lex could almost see into his mind, as if reading his thoughts. Marcus was jealous because he thought Lex was engaged to Greta Noel, and would thus be joining the main family, and that was the reason he was so appreciated by Joseph. He felt overlooked and underappreciated, and there was a seed of sinister intentions that seemed to be sprouting within him. Lex could almost actually see what actions he was planning to take, as if he was watching a movie. Lex looked out to the tower, and saw that it seemed to be acting as some kind of funnel, channeling some unknown energy through its base to its tip, where the energy was gathering. He could tell that when enough energy gathered, the birds would probably come and rest there, and the monthly worshipping ceremony would commence. How intriguing. Lex spent the rest of the carriage ride in relative silence, as he absorbed the information the lenses were giving him. When they finally arrived at the building where the teleportation formation was, Lex interestingly looked around like a child at a zoo. The lenses still did not recognize the formation, but since Lex already knew the purpose of it, he could extrapolate even more information. Moreover, he was now more easily able to guess Marcus' plan. Lex didn't know how much he trusted the information from the lenses, so he started planning out a way to ensure everything went smoothly, without preemptively attacking or punishing Marcus. It was an intriguing challenge, since he already knew what he wanted to do. "Are you sure you won't accept any payment?" Lex asked one last time, as Marcus led him to the teleportation room. This time around, only he and Fenrir would use the formation, so he expected it to cost a lot, but Marcus was insistent that they could not accept payment. One had to admit, his acting of being the perfect host was quite remarkable. Impossible. Something as minor as this is not even enough to count as being a good host. Next time you visit, you must allow me to throw a banquet for you. Then take care of yourself. Next time, we will definitely dine together. With a smile and a nod, Lex walked to the center of the teleportation platform, a tiny Fenrir following along. A few minutes later, the formation completely turned on, and the two disappeared. As if a switch had been flipped, Marcus' generous smile turned into an ugly scowl. He had no idea who Lex was, or why his uncle gave him so much importance. Irritation and jealousy filled his entire being, engulfing him. There was a minor struggle in his mind as he wondered if he should really do something. In the end, he concluded that there was no way for anyone to detect if he did anything, and so made a move. Prior to the teleportation, he had not interfered with the formation, as there were many ways to detect such things, and he did not know if Lex would be able to tell it had been tampered with. Yet now that he was already gone, or to be more specific, mid-teleportation, there was nothing he could do. With eyes filled with sinister intentions, Marcus moved, not towards the exit, but the control room. The teleportation formation, in truth, was quite massive and could not really fit inside a room. The entire formation was hidden from view, with only 2 points within reach. One was the teleportation platform, and the other was the control panel in the adjacent control room. Yet the moment Marcus tried to enter the room, he hit an invisible barrier. As if triggered by something, the invisible barrier became opaque, making Marcus realize that he was trapped inside. "Young man, you're 1,000 years too young to be playing such games in front of me," a familiar voice said, startling Marcus. He turned around, but could not find Lex anywhere, so then where was his voice coming from? "As a small punishment, I'll leave you in this small room for a few months. Use this time to contemplate your life decisions. The next time we meet, I'll ask you about the conclusion you reached." A trace of fear crept into Marcus' heart as he tried to figure out what was going on. Yet no matter how he searched, he could not come up with an answer, and he could not break the barrier either. He was completely trapped. Chapter 659 Nemesis. Marcus was not a weakling. Since he had been trusted by Joseph to take care of things in his absence, then not only did Marcus have to have a minimum cultivation, he needed to have proved himself over the years. He was a mid-level nascent realm cultivator, with excellent administrative experience as well as battle experience in skirmishes against neighboring nobles. All in all, he could be considered to have vast experience in various fields. Yet at the moment he found himself completely at a loss. He did not even consider how Lex was able to discover his intentions, for that no longer mattered. What truly befuddled him was how Lex was able to trap him after he had already left. After all, the opaque barrier surrounding him had not appeared until he tried to enter the control room. Moreover, the fact that Lex's voice spoke to him after the barrier appeared also meant that this was no accident. But his panic dissolved quickly, and instead he focused on breaking the barrier. He took his time to use one of his most powerful spiritual techniques, which had a long starting time, and attacked the barrier full force. Truthfully, this was not a good idea, as using such a destructive technique in close quarters would also harm him, but he would deal with that after he broke free. Unfortunately, not only did he not break free, the barrier did not even waver. Disbelieving of what he was seeing, Marcus tried again. Then again. The barriers were not breaking. Moreover, to his alarm, he discovered that as he absorbed the spirit energy in the atmosphere to fuel his techniques, the energy density of the room was falling. That meant that the barrier prevented more energy from coming into the room, N0VLISP.C0M. This was even more alarming. If such a trend continued, not only would he soon run out of energy to fuel his attacks, he would run out of energy to sustain himself. If what Lex said was true, and he was trapped for weeks or months, he had to be extremely sparing in his energy consumption. Such a period of time was not a problem for him to survive even without food or water, so long as he had enough energy to fuel his nascent soul. Desperation began filling his eyes, and he took out some weapons from his spatial ring and continued to try to break free, but it was not destined to be. There were many things Lex could not claim to be skilled in. But as far as putting up barriers that could absorb a lot of damage was concerned, Lex felt himself an expert. A few minutes later, Lex's teleportation ended, and he found himself in a smaller room with a few guards standing by, taking note of all the arrivals. This was the arrival terminal for Delurian Drip Bog. The area was not really a part of anyone's territory, but bordered the territory of various nobles, and so was considered somewhat of a transit area. There were a minimum amount of facilities available for travelers, but that was it. This was because the bog was actually quite massive, and home to numerous savage beasts of considerable strength. In fact, even Trollops had given up on using the bog for themselves, as the local fauna was not conducive to occupying territory. Therefore, building too many facilities was also not a solution. Usually, traveling through the bog meant following certain, pre-established routes which avoided the known beast territories. Even that carried with it a risk, which usually prompted large groups to gather and form caravans. Lex, of course, was not going to bother with any of that. He would make a beeline towards his destination, only taking diversions if his instincts warned him. Well, instincts and now his lenses. He was truly beginning to like them. After all, based on the data provided by the lenses and his own instincts and intuition, Lex was able to predict that Marcus would take one of two actions. He would either leave without doing anything, or interfere with Lex's teleportation, sending him instead to some unknown territory. Having narrowed down Marcus' possible actions, Lex began devising his actions. Although he had incredible defensive techniques, he could not deploy them without being there himself, so the only alternative was to use arrays. That in itself was not an issue. He quite enjoyed arrays, and with practice he was slowly mastering stronger and more complex arrays. He also kept consulting the book in his ring, though by now he had covered almost the entire book and would soon need a higher-level book to consult. The real issue was twofold. First, he had to ensure that the array would only trigger its trapping function if Marcus tried to take some action against him. Second, he needed to trap Marcus in barriers strong enough to actually hold him. If he could use his techniques, that might not be an issue, but his arrays never benefited from the strengthening effect of regal embrace. Ideally, he wanted to create some kind of barrier as strong as his impervious hands, his strongest defensive technique. Creating a condition for the activation of the array was challenging, but not impossible. He entered the overdrive state and ultimately came up with a solution. Creating a barrier strong enough to trap a nascent realm cultivator, though, also ended up being pretty simple. Back when Lex was going through the floors in the pagoda, one of the rewards for clearing the floors had been an array character that meant self. Learning that character enabled Lex to try something new. Instead of creating complex functions that would eventually result in a strong barrier being created, he used the techniques he could use as a natural standard. Conveniently, the array seemed to work. With both the issues resolved, Lex happily entered the teleportation formation without concern for what happened. The fact that he had arrived safely either meant that Marcus had not attempted to harm him, or that he had, and his plan was foiled by Lex's own array. Either way, Lex was satisfied with the outcome. "You ready?" Lex asked Fenrir as they exited the terminal. "This next part will be longer, and probably more dangerous too." Fenrir only gave a single, excited bark, indicating his answer. An odd thought occurred to Lex as he climbed onto Fenrir's back, allowing the pup to begin his sprint through the bog. Fenrir was in the Golden Core realm, yet the pup could still not talk. Yet Lex had met so many other beasts who had been able to actually talk with him even at the Foundation realm. He wondered why there was a difference. Clearly Fenrir was intelligent, and his abilities were powerful and numerous. So then why was the pup still limited to barking and yelping, instead of talking like other beasts? He refused to believe that other beasts had a higher pedigree than Fenrir. This belief was not a result of a bias, but a clear answer provided to him by the system. After pondering for a bit, the only answer he could come up with was that Fenrir was still a pup, and would have to grow for a few more years before it could gain the gift of speech. Unlike the previous time, where Lex had a clear destination, this time Lex only had a direction. He had to travel using the Crystal Realm equivalent of a compass, and head northeast until he reached the territory owned by Sentinels, one of the main races of the Crystal Realm. Moreover, the trip was also much longer than his previous one. Traveling through the bog was not easy or pleasant. Besides the various pungent smells of unknown gases, which only made one lightheaded due to the overpowering scent, there were also many poisonous gases. Fortunately, Lex quickly discovered that both he and Fenrir seemed to be immune to most of the poisons they encountered. Moreover, by reading about them from the lenses every time he encountered them, Lex began to learn exactly what types of poisons his body could withstand. Of course, there were some poisonous gases they had to avoid, for they could harm even them. Besides, that was the extremely damp and humid environment, not to mention the endless puddles, the soggy, squishy ground and what often looked like firm ground, but ended up being a soft layer of dirt covering some strange viscous liquids. The extremely uncomfortable environment almost made one ignore the numerous decaying corpses they encountered on almost every turn. That was because hidden in every puddle, under every clump of soil, behind every rock was some kind of creature, waiting to devour its prey. Fenrir quite enjoyed the game of tag the endless creatures played as they chased them through the bog. Lex, too, would not have cared so much if he hadn't encountered his oldest and most hated nemesis in the bog, mosquitoes. Moreover, they were overgrown, mutated mosquitoes. Chapter 662 Weeks. Within the bog, for the first time, Fenrir's excellent stealth abilities failed the duo. That was because as much as his abilities could hide them from being sensed, if the pup ran across a beast's nose, then it would not need to rely on spiritual sense to find them. The problem was that this example did not carry any exaggeration at all, and was exactly what the duo faced. At times, the bog was so completely empty that they would not come across a single living thing. Other times, the place was so packed that let alone run from in front of a beast, Fenrir directly used a beast's head as a platform to jump over. Yet what was fortunate was that none of the creatures chasing them held any considerable threat. In fact, the reason they were chasing was because Lex and Fenrir couldn't be bothered to deal with them, as it would be too tedious. Besides, after chasing them for a while, the beasts would either get tired, or return to their respective territories. Of course, once or twice they encountered some beasts that they could not afford to ignore. Most of the time, in such scenarios, they would choose to circle around them. If that was not possible, only then would they fight. Moreover, they attacked with full force right from the get-go, so they usually overwhelmed their targets. Many times, while on their journey, they crossed by some places where Lex would feel incredible opportunities waiting for them. He felt his instincts tell him that he would benefit greatly by diverting to a certain direction, where the lenses identified some incredibly rare treasures. For example, once while running, Lex spotted what looked like a decaying tree, only for the lenses to identify them as a certain incredibly valuable herb. Moreover, the age of the herb was already several hundred years old. Among many of its other uses, the one that his lens listed that appealed most to Lex was that it could be used by body cultivators to temper their bodies even if they were in the nascent realm. Such a herb was genuinely extremely valuable, and Lex even considered having it sent to the greenhouse at the inn. But, for better or for worse, Lex had decided not to take any detours during this journey. No matter how attractive an opportunity seemed, he ignored it. It may have seemed like a waste at first, but the longer they kept running, the more appropriate it seemed. After a day of running through the bog, Lex still felt some reluctance. 3 days later, he had more or less become used to the feeling of ignoring opportunities. A week later, he was completely numb to it. It was taking so long to travel to their destination. If he were to take small stops at every opportunity, their journey would only become that much longer. Still, he mentally marked the bog as an area where he could potentially come back if he ever needed to gather some treasures. The tedium and monotony of their travel changed on the 8th day, when the flock of soul birds in the region suddenly flew away. Their departure was extremely sudden and left them no room for preparation. The darkness that followed was all-encompassing, and carried a weight with it that the entire bog felt, not just the duo. All the creatures that had been chasing them so far suddenly stopped, and in fact did something that surprised Lex. They left their territories, and participated in a mass migration where no one creature harmed another. Despite their usual animosity, they traveled together in harmony. Where they were heading was a mystery to Lex, for it was not in the same direction as him. An hour later, the bog had become the most silent he had seen since he arrived. The sound of Fenrir's running was muted due to the pup's own abilities, so the only sound for them to hear was of the bog itself. N0VLUSB.C0M. Each bubble of noxious gas that escaped a nearby puddle, the rustling of the grass in the wind, the eerie wailing and croaking of old dead trees all seemed to form an orchestra that could be heard for miles. For a short while, they enjoyed, or suffered through, the symphony of nature that the bog orchestrated before soft, distant sound disturbed it. It was the sound of a footstep in the mushy, squishy ground of the bog. Then, a few moments later, there was another. Slowly and steadily, bit by bit, the monsters of the darkness started to appear. But these monsters, who were born from the fresh darkness, would be the weakest, and were not worth Lex's attention. In fact, it would take weeks or even months before any monsters capable of attracting their attention could even be born. Nonetheless, Lex remained careful, for he did not know how the creatures of the bog would react. Since they had lived in such circumstances for countless years, they clearly had a way to deal with monsters, and Lex didn't want to get swept in with them when that happened. Through the pitch darkness, the duo continued their journey for several more days. The vast size of the crystal realm was finally coming into perspective, for they had gone running non-stop for days without crossing through it, and this was only supposed to be a small territory. Finally, after running continuously for 2 weeks, Lex decided to take a break. Even if he could continue to stay awake for longer, he thought it was best to refresh themselves, so they stayed in peak condition. He was also especially concerned for Fenrir. The pup displayed no agitation or exhaustion, but this was the longest the pup had ever gone without resting or playing at the inn, so he wanted him to get some rest as well. The duo teleported back, and both of them went to their own abodes to clean and freshen up. Although they had already become numb to it, that did not mean that others could ignore the stench of the bog that they were reeking. After a nice, refreshing bath, Lex came to the conclusion that the inn needed to focus more on spa facilities. New notification: the Midnight Inn is not liable for the host's bad hygiene. Lex froze. That was the first time the system had directly responded to one of his random thoughts with a notification. Was this a result of the system's functionality improving? He tried to test it out by thinking of a few other random but derisive thoughts, but the system provided no other notifications. Lex took note of the occurrence but did nothing else about it. He went straight to bed to get his first sleep in over 2 weeks. He was out the moment his head hit the pillow, a miracle on its own, and enjoyed a deep, restful sleep that lasted only 6 hours. Even that was a result of Lex refusing to wake up stubbornly. He was quite upset about his body's decreased dependence on sleep. It was one of his favorite hobbies. Fortunately, Mary appeared to provide him with a distraction from his woeful sleep situation. Alexander has come back to the inn, and has requested to meet Lex. Is Fenrir awake? Lex asked, hoping the pup shared in his misfortune. No, he's asleep. Unfortunately, it was not to be. With a defeated sigh, he picked himself up and teleported over to Alexander, who was once again waiting for Lex in a remote location of the inn. After ordering an unnecessarily large amount of food, Lex approached the teenager. I heard you're looking for me, Lex said with a pleasant smile as he sat across from him. Yes. Although, I didn't think you'd arrive so quickly. It just so happened that I was free and available. If you had arrived a few hours later, it was unlikely you'd be able to get in touch with me. It appears I am quite lucky. You once offered to spar with me, saying that it would be a good experience for the both of us. Is that offer still available? Yes, of course. But I just ordered some food. Why don't we eat something first, before we get down to business? Alexander looked reluctant, but eventually sat down across Lex. Lex, in the meanwhile, was reminded of something by Alexander's mention of sparring. John, who had been challenged to a fight in the murder grounds, had still not returned. The challenger had not returned either, so there was no chance that he was dead. At least, he was not dead yet anyway. But the exceedingly long fight began to worry Lex. Was it normal for fights to last so long? The truth was, fights between immortals really could stretch out for days, or sometimes even weeks. But in this case, the fighting was taking long, because John was slowly and steadily wearing his enemy out. Since the fight had turned out to be harder than expected, he had to take drastic measures.